During the final fitting for her wedding dress, my daughter looked at me in the mirror and sneered, "Your life is nothing to be proud of, Dad, so do not show up if you are going to look like a servant." I stood there silent, my hands trembling slightly not from age, but from a rage I had buried for decades. I nodded slowly. That afternoon I quietly canceled every check, every deposit, and every guarantee I had made for her big day. By the time she realized what I had done, it was too late. Before I tell you how I turned her dream wedding into her worst nightmare, please like and subscribe to support this channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever been underestimated by your own family. My name is Isaiah Jefferson. I am 75 years old. To the world, and specifically to my daughter Jasmine, I am just a retired construction worker with calloused hands and a small pension. A man who counts coupons at the grocery store. A man who wears suits that are 20 years out of style. They see the gray hair and the stooped shoulders and they assume I am weak. They assume I am barely getting by. They have no idea. I was standing in the middle of the most exclusive bridal salon in Manhattan. The air smelled of lavender and money. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, sparkling under the lights. Jasmine was standing on a velvet pedestal wearing a Vera Wang gown that cost $15,000. She looked beautiful, like the princess her mother Ruth and I always treated her as. But her face was twisted in an ugly expression as she looked down at me. "Dad, stop looking at the price tag. It is embarrassing," she hissed. I had merely adjusted my glasses to read the invoice on the counter. $15,000 for a dress you wear once. It seemed excessive even for a man with my bank account. "Jasmine, honey," I said softly. "It is a beautiful dress, but $15,000 is a lot of money. Maybe we could look at something a bit more reasonable." That was the trigger. She spun around, the silk rustling like a storm. "Reasonable," she laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "That is your favorite word, isn't it? Reasonable. Safe. Small. You have spent your entire life bowing your head, Isaiah. Scraping for pennies. Fixing other people's roads while living in a shack in Brooklyn." The words hit me like physical blows. I built bridges that millions of people drive on. I worked double shifts in the freezing rain to pay for her private school. I saved every dollar while my friends bought new cars so that she would never know hunger. "Your life is nothing to be proud of," she continued, her voice rising so the other wealthy patrons could hear. "You are small time, Dad. You always have been. If you are going to come to my wedding looking like a charity case, then just don't come at all. I do not want you embarrassing me in front of Brad's family." Speaking of the devil, Bradford Harrington III strolled over from the waiting area. He was 28 years old with a smile that looked like it cost more than my first house. He was the son of a prominent real estate family, or so they claimed. He put a hand on Jasmine's shoulder and looked at me with that pitying sneer I had come to hate. "Easy, babe," Brad said, chuckling. "Don't worry about Isaiah. We can put him at the back table near the kitchen entrance. He will feel right at home with the servers." My blood boiled. I wanted to tell them right then. I wanted to scream that I owned the building we were standing in, that I had a net worth of $15 million amassed through 50 years of shrewd real estate investments in Brooklyn before gentrification hit. I wanted to tell Brad that I knew he was drowning in gambling debt and that his parents were mortgaged to the hilt. But I didn't. I looked at my daughter, the girl I had carried on my shoulders, the girl I had grieved with when her mother died. She was gone, replaced by the stranger who measured a man's worth by the label on his jacket. I took a deep breath. The anger cooled into something solid and heavy like concrete setting in a mold. "You are right," I said, my voice steady. "I should not embarrass you." I reached into my old battered leather wallet. It was fraying at the edges. Jasmine rolled her eyes, expecting me to pull out a wad of crumpled bills or a debit card that might be declined. Instead, I pulled out a single card. Heavy, black, titanium. The Centurion card from American Express. I handed it to the sales clerk who had been watching us with disdain. Her eyes widened when she felt the weight of the metal. She looked at the name, Isaiah Jefferson. She looked at me, then back at the card. Her demeanor changed instantly. "Of course, Mr. Jefferson," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I will run this deposit immediately." Jasmine didn't notice. She was too busy admiring herself in the mirror, twisting to see how the train of the dress fell. Brad was too busy texting on his phone, likely checking the spread on a football game. They missed the moment the power in the room shifted. I signed the receipt. "Consider this the last gift," I whispered to myself. I walked out of the shop into the bustling New York afternoon. The sun was shining, but I felt cold. My daughter wanted a life without my interference. She wanted to distance herself from my worthless life. As I hailed a taxi to take me back to Brooklyn, I made a promise. I would give her exactly what she asked for. I would withdraw my embarrassing presence, and along with it, I would withdraw every single dime of my invisible fortune. The wedding was 3 weeks away. That was plenty of time to watch their world crumble. The taxi ride back to Brooklyn felt longer than usual. The silence in the cab gave me too much time to think, too much time to replay the look of absolute disgust on my daughter's face. When the car finally pulled up to the curb of my brownstone, I sat there for a moment, just staring at the peeling paint on the front railing. To the neighbors, to the world, and especially to Jasmine, this house was just an old, drafty relic from a bygone era. It was the home of a retired bridge engineer who lived on a fixed income and clipped coupons to save 50 cents on detergent. I paid the driver with cash, counting the bills, slowly keeping up the act even when no one was watching. I climbed the stoop, my knees protesting with every step. Inside the house smelled of old wood and the lemon polish I used to keep the dust at bay. It was quiet. Too quiet. It was the kind of silence that usually brought me peace, but tonight it felt heavy, suffocating under the weight of the secrets buried within these walls. I walked into my study, a small room at the back of the house that Jasmine always called my dungeon. She hated this room. She said it smelled like old men and failure. I locked the heavy oak door behind me and closed the blinds, shutting out the fading daylight. I needed to see it. I needed to remind myself that I wasn't the worthless man she accused me of being. I moved the dusty painting of the Brooklyn Bridge that hung on the north wall. Behind it sat a steel wall safe, cold and imposing. My fingers, calloused from 40 years of building the infrastructure of this city, spun the dial with muscle memory. Left to 32, right to 15, left to 7. The tumblers clicked into place with a satisfying thud. I pulled the heavy door open. There was no stack of dirty dollar bills inside. There were no jars of coins. Instead, sitting neatly in leather-bound folders was the truth. I pulled out the first folder and laid it on the desk. It was the deed to a 20-story commercial building in downtown Brooklyn. Next to it, I placed the deed to a luxury apartment complex in Queens. Then another, and another. 5 buildings, 5 pillars of an empire I had built quietly, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, while wearing work boots and neon vests. I ran my hand over the paper. $15 million in real estate assets. Certificates for index funds that had been compounding interest since the 80s. I wasn't just comfortable. I was wealthy. I was powerful. And I was completely alone. My eyes drifted to the small framed photograph sitting in the corner of the safe. It was Ruth. My beautiful, wise Ruth. She was laughing in the photo, her head thrown back, unaware that the cancer would take her from me just 2 years later. Her voice echoed in the empty room as clear as if she were standing right beside me. Isaiah, she had said one night watching a young Jasmine sleep. Do not let the money poison her. We earned this with sweat and blood. If she grows up thinking the world owes her everything, we will have failed her. Teach her the value of labor first. The money can come later. I squeezed my eyes shut. I had tried, Ruth. I had tried so hard. I hid the wealth to teach her humility. I lived simply so she would understand the value of $1. But somewhere along the way, the lesson twisted. Instead of learning to value labor, she learned to despise it. Instead of respecting the man who came home with dirt under his fingernails, she learned to be ashamed of him. I had built a fortress of lies to protect her character, but instead I had created a monster who looked at her own father and saw nothing but a servant. I was about to put the deeds back when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the quiet room. I pulled it out, expecting a text from the service provider or maybe a spam call. It was a notification from my bank. Alert: transaction exceeding limit authorized. Amount $50,000. Merchant: The Sapphire Club, Las Vegas. I stared at the screen, my reading glasses sliding down my nose. $50,000. I swiped the notification to see the details. It was charged to the supplementary card I had given Jasmine years ago. I had told her it was for emergencies only, for medical bills, for a car repair if she was stranded. I sat back in my leather chair, the air leaving my lungs. $50,000. Just last week, Jasmine had told me she was going on a corporate retreat. She said her company was sending her to a training seminar in Nevada. She said she had received a performance bonus that covered her flights. She had looked me in the eye, kissed my cheek, and lied. She wasn't at a seminar. She was throwing a bachelorette party, a party that cost more than I supposedly earned in a year. She was burning through the money she thought was my entire life savings, and she didn't care. She thought she was draining the pension of a foolish old man, leaving him with nothing, all for one night of champagne and flashing lights. The betrayal tasted like copper in my mouth. It wasn't the money. I could afford $50,000. It was the cruelty. She was willing to bankrupt her father for a party. She was willing to leave me destitute in my old age so she could impress her friends. And then a thought struck me, sharp and cold. Bradford Harrington, her fiancé, the man who claimed to be American royalty, the man whose family supposedly owned half of Connecticut. If Brad was so wealthy, if his family was drowning in old money, why was Jasmine stealing from me? Why was a billionaire's fiancé charging a party to a retired construction worker's emergency card? Something didn't add up. The math was wrong. The narrative they were spinning was full of holes. I looked at the wedding dress receipt I had taken from the shop earlier. $15,000. Brad had stood there and watched me pay it. He had mocked me, belittled me, and then let me swipe my card. A real man, a man with the wealth he claimed to have, would never have let his future father-in-law, a man he believed to be poor, pay for that dress. He would have covered it without blinking. Unless he couldn't. I picked up my phone again. My hand was steady now. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by the cold, hard resolve of a man who used to calculate load-bearing limits for suspension bridges. I knew how to spot a crack in the foundation, and I was looking at a massive one. I dialed a number I hadn't called in months. It rang twice. "David," I said, my voice low and gravelly. "Isaiah." "Is everything all right?" "David." Cohen's voice was sharp alert. He was the best lawyer in New York and the only man outside of this room who knew exactly what I was worth. "No, David. Everything is far from all right." I looked at the deeds spread out on my desk. I looked at the bank notification glowing on my phone screen. "I need you to open a file," I said. "I want you to run a full financial background check on Bradford Harrington. I want to know everything. His debts, his credit score, his assets, his family's holdings. I want you to dig until you hit bedrock." There was a pause on the line. "Isaiah, you've never asked for this kind of thing before. Is the boy in trouble?" "I don't know," I replied, my eyes fixing on Ruth's picture. "But I want to know why a so-called multimillionaire just let his retired blue-collar father-in-law pay $15,000 for a dress. And David, I want to know why my daughter just charged $50,000 to my emergency card for a party in Vegas when she is marrying into royalty." "I understand," David said, his tone shifting from friend to attorney. "I will get my team on it immediately. We will have a preliminary report within 48 hours. "Good," I said. "And David?" "Yes, Isaiah. Prepare the paperwork. If what I suspect is true, I am going to need to cancel a lot more than just a credit card." I hung up the phone and set it on the desk. The room was dark now, the only light coming from the street lamp outside filtering through the blinds. I looked at the deeds one last time before gathering them up. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was an investor inspecting a failing asset. I was a builder looking at a structure that needed to be condemned. Jasmine thought my life was worthless. She thought I was nothing but a source of embarrassment and a small piggy bank to be smashed open and discarded. She had no idea that the man she despised was the only thing standing between her and the cold, hard reality of the world. I put the deeds back in the safe. I spun the dial, locking away my power once again. "Let them play their games," I whispered to the empty room. "Let them think they have won, because when the truth comes out, it is going to hit them harder than a wrecking ball." I walked out of the study and locked the door. I went to the kitchen to make a cup of tea, the cheap brand in a chipped mug. I sat at the small table sipping the hot liquid, waiting for the phone to ring again, waiting for the evidence that would confirm my darkest suspicion, that my daughter wasn't marrying a prince, she was marrying a parasite, and she had become one herself. The engagement dinner was held at Le Bernardin, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Manhattan. Brad's parents, Charles and Linda Harrington, had chosen the venue, or rather, they had selected the location where they intended to stage their performance of wealth and sophistication. I arrived precisely on time wearing my best navy blue suit. It was a poly blend off the rack from a department store sale 10 years ago. It was clean and pressed, but next to the custom Italian silk worn by the Harrington men, I looked like the help. As I approached the table, the conversation faltered. Linda Harrington peered at me over the rim of her designer glasses. She was a woman who wore her jewelry like armor layers of gold and diamonds that seemed designed to dazzle and distract. "Oh, Isaiah," she said with a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You made it. We were not sure if you could find the place. It is a bit tucked away for someone not familiar with the city's finer establishments." "I found it just fine. Thank you," I said, taking the empty seat at the end of the table. The chair felt flimsy beneath me, not because of its quality, but because of the precariousness of my welcome. Brad was sitting next to Jasmine, his arm draped possessively over the back of her chair. He looked at me and winked a gesture that felt more like a conspiratorial sneer than a greeting. "Good to see you, Pops," he said. "Try not to order the most expensive thing on the menu, okay? We do not want to give you a heart attack when you see the bill. Or worse, have you washed dishes to pay for it?" The table chuckled politely, a ripple of forced amusement. Jasmine didn't defend me. She just took a sip of her wine and looked away, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth as if studying the weave of the fabric. So Isaiah Charles Harrington boomed his voice too loud for the refined, hushed atmosphere of the dining room. "Brad tells us you used to work on the roads. Must be tough work, hard on the back. Not much room for advancement, I imagine." "It was honest work," I said, unfolding my napkin and placing it on my lap. "It put food on the table and clothes on my daughter's back." Of course," Charles said dismissively, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. "But you know we are so happy Jasmine is marrying into the family. The Harringtons have a legacy, you know. We build things, we own things, we do not just fix them. We are creators, not maintainers." I took a sip of water to wash down the insult. It tasted bitter, not from the lemon slice floating in it, but from the gall rising in my throat. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice calm and measured, "I was thinking about the wedding. It is getting very expensive." Brad leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "Don't worry about it, old-timer. We know you are tapped out after the dress. My family has the rest covered." "Right, Dad?" Charles Harrington coughed and took a sudden, intense interest in his menu, his finger tracing the line of appetizers. "Well, yes, of course. Although liquidity is a bit tight right now with the market being what it is, we might need to restructure some payments, move some assets around. You understand how it is with complex portfolios." Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A single short vibration. It was a text from David Cohen. I pulled it out under the table, shielding the screen with my hand, and read it. "Isaiah, you were right. Brad Harrington has $300,000 in gambling debts. His parents' home is in foreclosure. They have refinanced 3 times. They are broke, Isaiah. They are looking for a bailout. They are hunting for a whale to mine. You are that whale." I looked up from my phone. I looked at Brad smiling, his arrogant smile, his teeth white and perfect. I looked at his parents trying to maintain their facade of aristocracy, their clothes expensive but their eyes desperate. And I looked at my daughter, who was so desperate to belong to this fake dynasty that she was willing to trample her own father to get there. They were not rich. They were predators. And I was the prey. They saw an old man with a paid-off house and a pension, and they saw a lifeline. I put the phone back in my pocket. The weight of the knowledge sat heavy in my chest. "Is everything okay, Isaiah?" Linda asked. Noticing my silence, her voice laced with false concern. "Everything is fine," I said. "I was just thinking about what Brad said. About owning things. It is funny how things work out. Sometimes the people who talk the most about owning things actually own nothing at all." The table went silent. Brad narrowed his eyes, the smile slipping from his face. "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice sharpening. "Nothing," I said, innocently feigning the confusion of an old man. "Just an old man's ramblings. My mind wanders sometimes. So tell me, Brad, this startup you are launching, the one you need investors for, how is that going?" Brad puffed out his chest, the arrogance returning in a rush. "It is going to be huge. We are revolutionizing the crypto space. It is a multi-level marketing platform for digital assets. Actually, Isaiah, I was going to talk to you about that. Jasmine tells me you have that old house in Brooklyn." I froze. My house. The home Ruth and I had bought 40 years ago. The home where we had raised Jasmine. "Yeah," Brad continued, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It is in a gentrifying area. The market is hot right now. If you sold it, you could get maybe $1 million for it. You could invest that with me. We could turn it into $10 million in a year. He paused, letting the number hang in the air. And you could move into one of our serviced apartments, he added. It would be better for you. No stairs, assisted living, someone to cook for you. You would be taken care of. I looked at Jasmine. She was nodding, her eyes bright with what I realized was greed, not love. It is a good idea, Dad, she said. That house is too big for you. It is old and drafty. The roof needs work. Brad can help you invest the money so you do not lose it. You do not understand finance, Dad. Let Brad handle it, invest it, or use it to pay off his bookie, or use it to save his parents from eviction. Let me think about it, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. I tried to make it sound like the tremor of age, the hesitation of a simple man overwhelmed by big numbers. Under the table, I pressed the record button on my phone. Excellent, Brad said, raising his glass. To family, and to smart investments. To smart investments, I echoed, raising my water glass. I drank my water. It tasted like victory. They had just shown me their hand. They wanted my house. They wanted my dignity. And they wanted to put me in a home so they could spend my life savings on their debts. But they had forgotten one thing. I was not just a road worker. I was a man who knew how to lay dynamite. I knew how to build a foundation, and I knew how to destroy one. And I was about to blow their entire world sky high. They thought they were playing a game with a senile old man. They didn't know they were sitting across from the bank, and the bank was about to foreclose. The following Tuesday, Jasmine showed up at my house unannounced. It was unusual. She usually only came over when she needed money, or when she wanted to drop off her laundry. But today there was a different energy about her, a frantic, nervous energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She didn't knock. She just used her key and let herself in the door, banging against the wall. Dad, she called out, her voice echoing in the hallway. Dad, where are you? I was in the kitchen nursing a cup of coffee and reading the financial section of the newspaper. I quickly folded it and tucked it under a stack of old magazines before she walked in. I am in here, Jasmine, I said. Is everything all right? She stormed into the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum. She was wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly food budget, and carrying a handbag that was worth more than my car. But her face was pinched and angry. We need to talk, she said, not bothering with a greeting. Brad and I were looking over some things, and we realized we need to get your affairs in order. Before the wedding. My affairs. It sounded so formal, so final, like I was already dead. What kind of affairs, honey? I asked, taking a sip of my coffee to hide the tremor in my hand. Financial affairs, she snapped. She started opening drawers, pulling out papers and tossing them onto the counter. Utility bills, junk mail, old receipts. She was looking for something specific. Jasmine, what are you doing? I asked, standing up. Those are private. Private, she scoffed. Dad, you are 75. You do not have privacy anymore. You have liabilities. She moved to the living room, opening the drawers of the sideboard where I kept some of my personal documents. Not the important ones, obviously. Those were safe in the study. But she found an old file folder labeled Insurance. She ripped it open, her eyes scanning the pages frantically. Finally, she pulled out a document. It was a life insurance policy I had taken out 30 years ago when I started working for the city. Is this it? She shrieked, waving the paper in my face. $50,000. That is all you have. I looked at the policy. It was a standard term life policy. $50,000. Enough to bury me and maybe pay off a few bills. It was all we could afford back then, I said quietly. Your mother and I prioritized putting food on the table and paying for your school. $50,000, she repeated, her voice dripping with disgust. That will barely cover the funeral Brad wants to throw. Do you have any idea how expensive things are, Dad? You are practically worthless. Even in death, you are a burden. The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Worthless. Burden. My own daughter. The girl I had taught to ride a bike. The girl I had held when she cried over her first heartbreak. She was looking at me like I was a broken appliance that needed to be thrown out. And that is not all, she continued, pacing the room. Brad says we need to secure the assets. He is worried about inheritance taxes and probate. He says it is messy. He says the smart thing to do is to transfer everything now, while you are still lucid. She pulled another document out of her bag. It was a legal deed, a transfer of property. for the house. Sign this, she said, thrusting the paper and a pen at me. It transfers the deed to me and Brad, effective immediately. We will let you live here, of course, for now, until we get the service department sorted out. It is better this way, Dad. It protects the asset. I looked at the paper. It was a quitclaim deed. If I signed it, I would be giving away my home, my sanctuary, the only place I had left, and I would be giving it to a man who called me a servant and a daughter who called me worthless. Jasmine, I said, my voice trembling, this is my home. I bought this house with your mother. We worked hard for it. And now it is falling apart, she interrupted. Just like you. Look around, Dad. The roof leaks. The windows are drafty. It is a money pit. Brad can leverage it. He can use the equity to invest in his company. He can make it work for us. For the family. For Brad, I corrected in my head. And what if I do not want to sign? I asked, looking her in the eye. Her face hardened. The mask of concern slipped away, completely revealing the cold calculation underneath. If you do not sign, she said, her voice low and dangerous, then you can forget about the wedding. You can forget about walking me down the aisle. And you can forget about ever seeing your grandchildren. Grandchildren. Brad and I are trying, she said, rubbing her stomach theatrically. We want to start a family right away. But I will not let my children around a stubborn, selfish old man who does not care about their future. If you do not sign this house over, you are dead to us. You will never hold my baby. You will never hear them call you Grandpa. You will die alone in this rotting house and no one will care. The threat hit me like a physical blow. She knew exactly where to strike. She knew that the only thing I wanted more than dignity was family. She was weaponizing my unborn grandchildren against me, using them as bargaining chips in a game of greed. I looked at the pen in her hand. It was a Mont Blanc. Probably a gift from Brad paid for with gambling winnings or a loan from his parents. I reached out, my hand shaking, not from age but from the sheer effort of holding back the rage that was threatening to consume me. I took the pen. I held it over the paper. The tip hovered over the signature line. Jasmine watched me, her eyes wide and hungry. She was practically vibrating with anticipation. She thought she had won. She thought the old man was broken. I touched the pen to the paper. A small dot of ink appeared. Then I stopped. I lifted the pen. I cannot, I whispered, letting my hand drop to the table. The pen clattered against the wood. What do you mean you cannot? She hissed. Just sign the damn paper. I need a notary. I said, my voice weak and raspy. I feigned a coughing fit, hunching over, clutching my chest. It has to be notarized, Jasmine. To be legal. I cannot just sign it here. It will not hold up in court. You know how the law is. She stared at me, frustration radiating off her in waves. Fine, she spat, snatching the paper back. I will bring a notary tomorrow, and you better be ready to sign, old man, or so help me God, you will never see me again. She grabbed her bag and marched toward the door. As she passed the hallway, my old cat Whiskers, a gentle tabby who had been Ruth's favorite, sat watching her. Jasmine didn't break stride. She kicked out her foot, catching the cat in the ribs. Move, you stupid animal, she shouted. Whiskers yowled in pain and scrambled away, hiding under the sofa. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. That was it. That was the final straw. She could insult me, she could threaten me, she could try to steal my house. But hurting an innocent animal, hurting Ruth's cat, that was a line she should never have crossed. Jasmine slammed the front door behind her, the sound echoing through the empty house. I walked over to the sofa and knelt down. Whiskers peered out at me, his green eyes wide with fear. It is okay, boy, I whispered, reaching out a hand. She is gone. She is not coming back. I stood up and walked to the window, watching her get into her car. She was on the phone, probably calling Brad to tell him the good news, to tell him the old man was cracking, to tell him the house was as good as theirs. They had no idea. I went back to the kitchen and picked up the phone. I dialed David Cohen's number again. David, I said when he answered. Isaiah, what is it? Change of plans. I said, my voice cold and hard as steel. We are not just canceling the wedding checks. I need you to draft a new document, a restraining order. And David, start the eviction process for any tenants in the commercial properties who are late on rent. I want to liquidate some assets. I need cash. A lot of it. Why, Isaiah? What are you planning? I am planning a wedding gift, David. A gift they will never forget. I hung up the phone. I looked at the spot on the table where the ink dot marked the deed. It was a small mark, but it represented the end of my patience, the end of my mercy. Jasmine wanted a legacy. She wanted an inheritance. She wanted to know what my life was worth. Well, she was about to find out, and the price tag was going to bankrupt her. The mahogany desk in David Cohen's office was cool to the touch, a stark contrast to the heat rising in my chest. I sat in the leather chair, my hands folded on my lap, looking at the document in front of me. It was a single sheet of paper, standard legal size, with crisp black text. To anyone else, it would look like a boring piece of administrative paperwork, a formality. But to me, it looked like the trigger of a loaded gun. The title at the top read, "Revocation of Third-Party Financial Guarantees." David sat across from me, his silver pen hovering over the signature line. He looked tired. He had been my lawyer for 30 years. He had helped me acquire buildings when banks laughed at a black man in work boots. He had helped me set up the trusts. He knew me better than my own family did. "Are you sure about this?" "Isaiah," David asked, his voice low and serious. "Once you sign this, there is no safety net. The wire transfers stop. The checks bounce. The contracts become void. It is the nuclear option." I looked at the document again. I thought about the $15,000 dress. I thought about the bachelorette party in Vegas charged to my emergency card. I thought about Whiskers, my poor cat, hiding under the sofa. And I thought about my daughter calling my life worthless. "I am sure, David," I said, my voice steady. "They want to live in a world where money defines worth. I am going to give them a crash course in economics." I picked up the pen. It felt heavy. I signed my name at the bottom, Isaiah Jefferson. The ink was dark and permanent. David took the paper and slid it into a folder. He opened another file on his desk. It was a spreadsheet, a detailed breakdown of every expense I had secretly guaranteed for this wedding. I looked at the numbers. They were staggering. The Grand Plaza Ballroom, the most expensive venue in the city. Jasmine had told me that Brad's parents used their connections to get it for free. That was a lie. I had put down a $50,000 deposit 6 months ago using a shell company so my name would not appear on the invoice. The florist. Imported white orchids from Thailand. $20,000. Guaranteed by me. The band. A 12-piece orchestra that played for senators and movie stars. $15,000. Guaranteed by me. And the honeymoon. 2 weeks in an overwater bungalow in the Maldives. First-class tickets. Private transfers, $65,000. All of it totaled $150,000. For months, I had been the invisible engine keeping this fantasy train running. I had done it because I wanted Jasmine to have the day she dreamed of. I had done it because I thought that even if she was marrying a fool, she was still my little girl. I thought that if I provided enough, she would be happy. I was a fool. I was not paying for her happiness. I was financing her delusion. "Cancel it all," I said, pointing at the list. "Every single dime. Notify the vendors today. Tell them the guarantor has withdrawn. Tell them to seek payment from the primary contract holders." "That would be Bradford Harrington and Jasmine Jefferson," David said. "They are listed as the primaries. You were just the silent backer." "Exactly," I said. "Let us see how deep the Harringtons' pockets really are when the bill comes due." David nodded, making notes in the margin. "But Isaiah, there is something else. My investigators found something disturbing when they ran the financial background check on Brad." My stomach tightened. I knew Brad was a gambler. I knew he was broke. But the look on David's face told me this was worse than simple debt. "What is it, David?" David turned his computer monitor so I could see it. It was a credit report. But it wasn't Brad's. It was Jasmine's. I spent 40 years building my daughter's credit. I opened a savings account for her when she was born. I added her as an authorized user on my oldest credit cards when she turned 18 to boost her score. She had a credit score of 820. It was pristine. It was the financial equivalent of a spotless reputation. David pointed to a line item dated 3 weeks ago. It was a loan application, a high-interest personal consolidation loan for $200,000. The applicants were listed as Bradford Harrington and Jasmine Jefferson. I stared at the screen. Jasmine never told me about this. She would never take out a loan with an interest rate of 18%. She knew better. I taught her better. "She didn't sign this," Isaiah, David said quietly. "We pulled the digital signature logs. The IP address used to sign the document matches Brad's cell phone. He used her social security number. He used her personal information. He added her to the loan without her knowledge." The room seemed to tilt. "He stole her identity," I whispered. He leveraged her credit, David corrected. His credit is shot. He has a score of 400. No bank would lend him $1 for a pack of gum. But Jasmine. She is a prime borrower. He used her good name to secure a loan to pay off his gambling debts. And because they are legally co-applicants now, she is liable for the full amount. I felt a surge of nausea. This wasn't just greed. This was predation. Brad wasn't just marrying her for her potential inheritance. He was harvesting her. He was using her like a resource, stripping her of her financial future before they even said I do. If he defaults on this, David said, and he will default, Isaiah, they will come after her. They will garnish her wages. They will ruin her score. She will be bankrupt before she is 30. My first instinct, the instinct of a father who had spent his life shielding his child from the rain, was to reach for the phone. I wanted to call her. I wanted to scream at her to run. I wanted to tell her that the man she was sleeping next to was a criminal who had put a noose around her neck. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. My thumb hovered over her contact name. Princess. That is what I still had her saved as. I closed my eyes. I imagined her voice. I imagined what she would say if I called her right now. She would not believe me. She would say I was jealous. She would say I was trying to sabotage her happiness because I was a bitter old man with a worthless life. She would accuse me of lying just like she accused me of being cheap in the dress shop. She was so blinded by the glare of the Harrington name that she couldn't see the knife in her back. If I saved her now, she would never learn. If I bailed her out of this, she would just find another Brad. She would continue to treat me like dirt, and she would continue to walk through life thinking she was untouchable because she was better than me. I thought about the house, the way she tried to force me to sign it over, the way she threatened to keep my grandchildren from me. She needed to see. She needed to feel the weight of the world without my shoulders to carry it. She needed to understand that the man she called worthless was the only reason she wasn't drowning. I lowered the phone. I placed it face down on David's desk. Do not tell her I said. David looked surprised. Isaiah, this is fraud. We could have him arrested right now. We could annul the loan. Not yet, I said, my voice cold and hard. Not yet. She needs to see who he really is, David. And she will not see it if I step in and fix it. She needs to see the notices. She needs to get the calls from the collectors. She needs to realize that while she was busy trying to steal my house, her fiancé was busy stealing her future. But the wedding is in a week, David pressed. If she marries him, the debt becomes marital property in some jurisdictions. It gets messier. Let it get messy, I said, standing up. She wanted a life of luxury. She wanted to be a Harrington. Well, this is the price of admission. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city skyline. I had built parts of this city. I knew that sometimes to build something strong, you had to dig down to the bedrock. You had to clear away the soft earth, the rotting wood. Jasmine was rotting. Her entitlement, her arrogance, her cruelty. It was a rot that had set deep in her soul. I turned back to David. File the revocation for the wedding payments today, I said. Let the checks bounce tomorrow. Let the vendors call them. Let the panic set in. And the loan, David asked. Leave it, I said. We will deal with it after the wedding, after the humiliation, after she is standing in the ruins of her perfect day. I grabbed my hat from the rack. She asked for a wedding gift, David. I am going to give her the truth. It is the most expensive thing I own. I walked out of the office, leaving the silence behind me. I had set the charges, the fuse was lit. Now all I had to do was wait for the explosion. It was going to be a long week, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one who was going to be afraid. I hailed a cab on the street corner. The city was loud and chaotic, but inside I felt a strange sense of calm. The calm of a man who has finally stopped fighting the current and decided to become the storm. My daughter wanted reality. She wanted to be an adult. She wanted to be independent of her embarrassing father. Well, Jasmine, I thought, as the cab merged into traffic. Welcome to the real world. I hope you brought a helmet, because the sky is about to fall. The week before the wedding was a masterclass in deception. Jasmine called me on Wednesday afternoon. Her voice was like syrup, thick and sweet, but I could taste the poison underneath. Hi, Daddy, she chirped. How are you doing today? Are you excited for the big day? I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at the empty bowl of oatmeal I had just finished. I haven't been excited about anything involving you since you were 12, Jasmine, I thought. But I kept my voice level. I am fine, Jasmine. Just getting ready. That is great, Dad. Listen, Brad and I were talking, and we realized we never got that notary over to finalize the deed transfer. We really want to get that sorted out before the wedding chaos starts. So you do not have to worry about it later. Worry about it. She meant so they could leverage it before the ink was dry. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting to the phone sitting on the table next to me. The recording app was already running. "Actually, honey," I said, putting on my best weary old man voice, "I am a bit tied up right now. I am at the hospital." The silence on the other end was instant and heavy. "The hospital?" she asked, her voice sharpening. "Why? What is wrong? Are you okay?" "Just some chest pains," I lied. "Probably nothing. But the doctor wants to run some tests. They are talking about keeping me overnight for observation." There was a muffled sound like a hand being placed over the receiver. I could hear whispers, urgent and angry. Then the phone was snatched away. "Listen to me, old man," Brad's voice barked into my ear. "You do not get to be sick right now. Do you hear me? You do not get to die on us. Not yet." "Brad," I said, feigning weakness. "I am just having some tests." "I do not care about your tests," he shouted. "We need that signature, Isaiah. We need that deed. We have a meeting with the bank on Monday morning. We need to show them collateral or the whole deal falls through. So you better get yourself discharged and get that paper signed. Do not die before you sign those papers, or I swear I will piss on your grave." I let the silence hang for a moment, letting the recording capture every syllable of his threat. He had just admitted it. They weren't waiting for me to die peacefully. They were on a deadline, Monday morning. That meant they were already underwater. That meant the sharks were circling. "I understand, Brad," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sound terrified. "I will do my best." "You better do more than your best," he snapped. "You better be alive and holding a pen by Friday, or you will regret it." The line went dead. I saved the recording. I backed it up to the cloud. I emailed a copy to David. Then I stood up. The weariness vanished. The frailty evaporated. I wasn't a sick old man. I was a general preparing for the final assault. I grabbed my coat and my hat. I walked out of the house, locking the door behind me. I didn't call a cab this time. I walked to the subway. I needed the noise. I needed the movement. I needed to be surrounded by people who were fighting their own battles, so I wouldn't feel so alone in mine. I took the train into Manhattan. I walked into the main branch of the bank where I held the joint account with Jasmine. It was a grand old building with marble floors and high ceilings, a temple to money. I approached the teller window. The young man behind the glass smiled at me. "How can I help you today, sir?" "I need to make a withdrawal," I said, sliding my debit card across the counter. "How much would you like to withdraw?" "Everything," I said. The teller blinked. "Everything, sir." "You mean close the account?" "No," I said. "Do not close it. Just withdraw the available balance. Leave $1. $1, he repeated, confused. "Yes, $1. He typed on his keyboard, his brow furrowing. "Sir, the balance is $6,452. You want to withdraw $6,451. "That is correct," I said. He looked at me, then back at his screen. "Okay, sir. I will just need to get authorization for that amount in cash. One moment, please." While he was gone, I looked around the bank. I saw people depositing checks, applying for loans, hoping for a better future. I had given Jasmine a better future. I had given her a head start that most people only dream of. And she had squandered it. She had used it to fund a fantasy life with a man who treated her father like livestock. The teller returned with a manager who looked at my ID and then at me. "Mr. Jefferson, everything seems to be in order. We can process this withdrawal. Can I ask, is there a reason for this large cash withdrawal? We just want to make sure you are not being coerced or scammed." I looked the manager in the eye. "I am not being scammed," I said. "I am stopping a scam." The manager nodded slowly, not understanding but sensing the resolve in my voice. He approved the transaction. 10 minutes later, I walked out of the bank with a thick envelope in my inside pocket. $6,451. It was the money I had deposited last week. The money Jasmine thought was her allowance. The money she was probably planning to use for a last-minute spa day or a deposit on a new handbag. I left $1 in the account. Just enough to keep it open. Just enough so she wouldn't get a notification that the account was closed. Just enough so that when she tried to swipe that card, it wouldn't say invalid account. It would say insufficient funds. It was a petty move. I knew that. But after Brad's threat, after hearing him tell me not to die before I signed over my home, I was done being the bigger man. I was done being the noble, suffering father. I was ready to be the lesson. I walked down the street, the envelope heavy against my chest. I wasn't going to keep the money. I didn't need it. I stopped at a small community center in Harlem, a place that ran after-school programs for kids who had nowhere else to go. I had volunteered there years ago, fixing their plumbing and electrical wiring for free. I walked into the director's office. She was a woman named Sarah who had been fighting to keep the doors open for 20 years. "Mr. Jefferson," she exclaimed, surprised to see me. "What brings you here?" I pulled the envelope out of my pocket and placed it on her desk. "For the kids, Sarah," I said. "Buy them some new books, fix the roof, whatever they need." She opened the envelope and gasped. "Isaiah, we cannot accept this. This is too much." "It is not enough," I said, "but it is a start. Just do me a favor. Do not put my name on it. Let it be anonymous." She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Isaiah. You are a good man." "I am a man who is tired of wasting money on people who do not appreciate it," I said. "I would rather invest in the future than throw it away on the past." I left the center feeling lighter. The money was gone. The safety net was gone. Jasmine was flying without a parachute, and she didn't even know it. Monday was coming. The bank meeting Brad was so worried about. The deadline. He needed that deed. He needed my signature, and he was going to get neither. Instead, he was going to get a front row seat to his own destruction, and Jasmine was going to be right there beside him holding the bag. I took the train back to Brooklyn. As I sat on the hard plastic seat watching the tunnels flash by, I thought about the wedding. 3 days away. It was going to be a beautiful ceremony. The flowers would be perfect. The music would be divine. And when the bill came due, it would be the most expensive reality check in history. I closed my eyes and smiled. "Do not die before you sign, old man," Brad had said. "Don't worry, Brad," I thought. "I plan on living a very long time. Long enough to watch you drown." The rehearsal dinner was held in the gilded room of the Plaza Hotel, a venue that dripped with old New York money and pretension. The walls were lined with gold leaf, and the ceiling was a fresco of cherubs looking down on us with what I imagined was judgment. I sat at table 12, a small round table positioned uncomfortably close to the swinging doors of the service kitchen. While the Harrington family and their entourage occupied the long center tables bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, I was relegated to the shadows. It was a strategic placement, close enough to be present, but far enough away to be ignored. I watched the servers circulate with trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than a week of groceries in my neighborhood. Truffle arancini, caviar blinis, Wagyu beef sliders. The guests devoured them with the casual indifference of people who have never known hunger. I touched the breast pocket of my suit. Inside was the phone that connected me to the real world, to the machinery I had set in motion. Jasmine was glowing. She moved through the room in a white cocktail dress, holding a flute of champagne, laughing at jokes that weren't funny and smiling at people she barely knew. She looked happy. But it was a brittle happiness, the kind that shatters the moment the light hits it the wrong way. She avoided my table. Every time her eyes swept the room, they skipped over me as if I were a stain on the wallpaper. Brad was in his element. He held court at the head table, his face flushed with alcohol and adrenaline. He was loud, boisterous, and completely unaware that the ground beneath him had already been mined. He looked like a man who had won the lottery without buying a ticket. I sipped my water. I didn't touch the wine. I needed a clear head. I watched Brad stand up, tapping his spoon against his crystal glass. The sharp ringing sound cut through the chatter. The room fell silent. "Attention. Everyone," Brad bellowed, swaying slightly. "I want to make a toast." He raised his glass high, the liquid gold catching the light. "First to my stunning bride-to-be Jasmine. You look like $1 million tonight, baby, and trust me, I know what $1 million looks like." The room erupted in polite laughter and applause. Jasmine beamed, blowing him a kiss. And to my parents, Charles and Linda, Brad continued gesturing to the couple who looked like they were smelling something unpleasant. "Thank you for welcoming Jasmine into the dynasty. I know she comes from humble beginnings, but she learns fast. She is practically a Harrington already." Humble beginnings. The insult was subtle, but it landed. He was erasing her history, erasing my contribution to her life, erasing the 40 years of stability I had provided. And finally, Brad said, turning his gaze toward the back of the room, toward the shadows where I sat. "To my future father-in-law, Isaiah." He pointed his glass at me. All heads turned. I felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. "Stand up, Isaiah," Brad called out. "Let everyone see you." I stood up slowly, my knees popping. I adjusted my jacket, maintaining my dignity despite the location of my table. "We have to give credit where credit is due," Brad said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Isaiah, thank you. Really. Thank you for doing the one thing you were good for. You gave us Jasmine." He paused for effect, letting the backhanded compliment sink in. "I mean, let us be honest, folks," Brad chuckled, looking around the room. "That is about all the contribution we got from that side of the aisle. Biology. But do not worry, Isaiah. You did your part. You got her here. Now the big boys are taking over. The Harrington money will handle everything from here on out. We will make sure she lives the life she deserves, a life you could never afford." The room exploded with laughter. It wasn't polite laughter this time. It was raucous, mocking laughter. They were laughing at the poor old construction worker. They were laughing at the man they thought was a charity case. I looked at Jasmine. I waited for her to stand up. I waited for her to defend me. I waited for her to say that I had worked my hands to the bone for her, that I was a man of honor. She didn't stand. She didn't speak. She covered her mouth and giggled, her eyes shining with amusement. She was laughing with them. She was laughing at me. The rage that had been simmering in my gut for weeks suddenly went cold. It froze into a solid block of ice. I looked at Brad. I looked at the guests, and I decided I had heard enough. I cleared my throat. My voice was not loud, but it carried the resonance of a man who had shouted over jackhammers and pile drivers for 40 years. "I would like to say a few words," I said. The laughter died down. An awkward silence filled the room. Brad looked annoyed, his moment in the spotlight interrupted. I looked directly at my daughter. "Jasmine." I began taking a step forward away from the kitchen doors. But before I could get another word out, Jasmine was out of her seat. She rushed over to me, her heels clicking on the parquet floor. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. "Sit down, Dad," she hissed through a clenched smile, her voice low so only I could hear. "Jasmine," I said, looking at her face, the face that used to look up at me with adoration. "I just want to speak." "No," she whispered fiercely. "You have done enough. Look at you. Your suit is old. You are embarrassing me." Brad was just making a joke. "Do not be so sensitive. Just sit down and be quiet. Do not ruin this night for me. Do not make a scene. Make a scene." She thought I was going to make a scene. She thought I was going to beg for respect. She thought I was going to cry. She had no idea. I looked at her hand on my arm. I looked into her eyes, and I saw nothing there for me. No love, no gratitude, not even pity, just shame. I gently removed her hand from my arm. "You are right, Jasmine," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I should not ruin the night. Enjoy it. It is the last peaceful night you are going to have for a very long time." She frowned, confused by my tone, but relieved that I was complying. "Good," she said, patting my shoulder like I was a dog. "Just stay here. Have some cake." She turned and walked back to the head table, sliding into her seat next to Brad. He whispered something in her ear, and they both laughed, clinking their glasses again. I sat down. I didn't eat the cake. I didn't drink the water. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed in the dim light. I opened my messages. David Cohen was at the top of the list. I typed 3 words: "Activate Plan 0." I hit send. I watched the little bubble indicate that the message was delivered. Then I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. I watched them celebrate. I watched them toast to a future that had already been canceled. I watched them dance on the deck of a sinking ship. Brad thought Harrington money covered everything. He thought he was the big boy taking over. Tomorrow morning, when he tried to pay the final balance for the venue, when the vendors came looking for their checks, he was going to find out exactly what Harrington money was worth. Nothing. And he was going to find out what Isaiah Jefferson was worth. Everything. I smiled a cold, humorless smile. It was done. The bridge was rigged. The detonator was pressed. Now all I had to do was wait for the sun to rise and watch the whole thing come crashing down. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. It was fitting. I stood in front of my open closet, staring at the 2 suits hanging side by side. On the left was a bespoke Armani tuxedo I had purchased in Milan 5 years ago during a business trip to inspect European hotel properties. It was sleek midnight blue and cost $4,000. It was the suit of a successful investor, a man of means and taste. On the right was my charcoal gray polyester blend. I had bought it off the rack at a discount warehouse in 1999 for a funeral. The fabric was stiff and uncomfortable. The elbows were shiny from years of wear. The cuffs were slightly frayed and the pants were cut just a little too short, exposing my ankles when I sat down. It smelled of mothballs and old cedar. It was the suit of a laborer, a man who counted pennies, a man who, according to my daughter, lived a worthless life. I reached past the Armani and took the gray suit off the hanger. I dressed slowly. I buttoned the white shirt that had yellowed slightly at the collar. I pulled on the trousers that were tight around the waist. I tied the tie a clip on that I had owned since the 80s. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like the owner of a $15 million empire. I looked like the man Jasmine was ashamed of. I looked like the man she wanted to erase. Perfect. I was adjusting the lapel when my phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a video call request from Jasmine. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the screen. Part of me, the part that was still just a father, wanted to ignore it. I wanted to hold on to the memory of her as a little girl for just one more hour before the war started, but I knew I needed this. I needed one last reminder of why I was doing what I was about to do. I accepted the call. Jasmine's face filled the screen. She was sitting in a makeup chair, a white silk robe draped over her shoulders. Her hair was already styled in an elaborate updo that probably cost more than my first car. She looked radiant. She looked like a princess. And then she saw me. The smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. Her eyes scanned my outfit through the camera lens and her lip curled in disgust. "Dad," she shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing. "What in the name of God are you wearing?" I looked down at my suit. "It is my best suit, Jasmine," I said calmly. "I wanted to look nice for your big day." "Nice," she spat. "You look like a janitor who got lost on his way to a funeral. Look at that tie. Look at those lapels. Dad, this is the wedding of the century. People are flying in from Europe. The press might be there. And you are planning to show up looking like that." "It is clean, Jasmine," I said. "And it is paid for." "I do not care if it is paid for," she yelled, causing her makeup artist to jump in the background. "It is garbage. You look like garbage. I told you. I specifically told you, if you could not look the part, you were not welcome." She leaned closer to the camera, her beautiful face distorted by rage. "Do not come," she hissed. "I am serious, Dad. Do not show up. I told Brad you might not make it because you were feeling sick. Stay home. Watch TV. Do not ruin my aesthetic with your poverty. I mean it. If I see that gray suit in my ballroom, I will have security throw you out." The threat hung in the air. She was uninviting her own father to his face on the morning of her wedding because of a polyester suit. She was ashamed of me. She was ashamed of the man who had worked double shifts to buy her the violin she played in high school. She was ashamed of the hands that had built the roof over her head. I looked at her. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a cold, clinical detachment, like a surgeon looking at a gangrenous limb that needed to be severed. "I will be there, Jasmine," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "No, you will not," she screamed. "I will be there," I repeated. "And I have a special gift for you, a gift you have earned." Before she could scream again, I ended the call. I put the phone in my pocket. I checked my wallet, making sure the heavy black titanium card was tucked safely behind my driver's license. I put on my old scuffed dress shoes. I walked out of my brownstone and locked the door. I didn't look back. I arrived at the Grand Plaza 2 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The venue was magnificent. It was a historic hotel in Midtown, a place of marble columns and velvet drapes. It was the kind of place where presidents stayed and oil tycoons threw parties. I walked through the revolving doors, the rubber soles of my cheap shoes squeaking against the polished floor. The lobby was bustling with activity. Florists were hauling in massive arrangements of white hydrangeas and orchids. Caterers were wheeling carts of silver serving trays. I stood in the center of the lobby, taking it all in. This was what I had paid for. The opulence, the grandeur, the sheer excess. It was a beautiful stage for a tragedy. "Excuse me, sir." I turned to see a young man in a sharp uniform standing behind me. He looked at my gray suit, my clip-on tie, and my scuffed shoes. His expression was polite but firm, the kind of look reserved for vagrants who had wandered into the wrong building. "The service entrance is around the back," he said, pointing towards a side door. "Deliveries and staff need to use the loading dock." I looked at him. I didn't blink. "I am not staff," I said. The young man sighed, his patience already wearing thin. Sir, this is a private event space. Unless you are a guest of the hotel, I am going to have to ask you to leave. We have a high-profile wedding today and we cannot have loiterers. I am here for the wedding, I said. He looked me up and down again, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Really? And who are you here for? The bride or the groom? I am here for the owner, I said. The young man laughed. The owner? Sir, the owner is a corporation. Now please, before I call security. Get Clara, I said, cutting him off. The name stopped him. He froze. Clara was the general manager of the Grand Plaza. She was a legend in the hospitality industry, a woman who ran this hotel with an iron fist. Entry-level security guards did not just summon Clara. Ms. Vance is extremely busy, the guard stammered. She is overseeing the Harrington wedding setup. She does not have time for. Tell her Isaiah is here, I said. Tell her the chairman wants to see her. The guard stared at me. He looked at my suit. He looked at my face. He saw something there that made him nervous. He tapped his earpiece and whispered into his radio. 2 minutes later, the elevator doors pinged open. Clara Vance stepped out. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, wearing a tailored black suit that cost more than my car. She walked with a purpose, her eyes scanning the lobby until they landed on me. The guard stepped forward, chest puffed out. Ms. Vance, I am so sorry this man was causing a disturbance I was just about to remove. Clara walked right past him as if he didn't exist. She walked straight up to me and stopped. She looked at my gray suit. She looked at my scuffed shoes. She didn't sneer. She didn't laugh. She bowed. It wasn't a curtsy. It was a deep, respectful bow of the head. Good morning, Mr. Jefferson, she said, her voice clear and carrying across the quiet lobby. The guard's jaw dropped. The receptionist behind the desk stopped typing. Good morning, Clara, I said. We were not expecting you so early, sir, she said, straightening up. But we are honored. I trust the preparations are to your liking. They look expensive, I said, looking at the flowers. Only the best for your daughter, sir, she said. Is everything ready, I asked. Clara nodded, her expression turning serious. We received the legal notice from your attorney, Mr. Cohen, this morning. We also received the instructions regarding the security protocols and the billing changes. Everything is set to execute on your command. And the staff I asked, briefed, she replied. They know that Mr. Harrington is the primary contact for all financial authorizations as of 10 a.m. this morning, and they know that the credit line has been revoked. Good, I said. Clara gestured toward the elevators. Would you like to wait in the owner's suite until the ceremony begins, Mr. Chairman? We have prepared your usual tea, and I believe Mr. Cohen is already up there waiting for you. Lead the way, I said. As we walked toward the elevators, I felt the eyes of the lobby staff boring into my back. The security guard who had tried to kick me out was pale-looking, as if he might faint. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to fire him. He was doing his job protecting the image of the hotel. He just didn't realize that the image he was protecting was mine. We stepped into the elevator and the doors closed, shutting out the noise of the lobby. You know Clara, I said, watching the numbers climb. My daughter told me this morning that I looked like a janitor. Clara adjusted her cuffs, her face impassive. With all due respect, sir, she said, your daughter has very poor eyesight. You look like the man who signs my paychecks. I chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Thank you, Clara. Let us go upstairs. I want to have a good view when the circus comes to town. The elevator dinged at the penthouse floor. I stepped out into the luxury I owned but never flaunted. Today, that was going to change. Today, I was going to use every ounce of power I had accumulated over 50 years, not to build a bridge, but to burn one down. The guests began to arrive at 6 o'clock sharp, filtering into the Grand Plaza ballroom like a stream of diamonds and silk. From my vantage point on the mezzanine balcony, I watched them. They were the cream of New York society, or at least the people who desperately wanted to be. Brad's family had invited half the city banking executives, real estate moguls, and socialites who probably didn't know the groom's middle name, but never turned down an open bar. The room was breathtaking. I had to give the florist credit. The white orchids I had paid $20,000 for cascaded from the ceiling like a floral waterfall. The tables were set with crystal that sparkled under the amber mood lighting. It was a scene from a fairy tale, a perfect stage for a masquerade where everyone was pretending to be something they were not. I stood in the shadows of the balcony railing looking down. I was still wearing my gray polyester suit. It scratched at my neck, but I didn't loosen the tie. Below me, I saw Jasmine making her grand entrance. She had changed into a second dress for the reception, a sleek silk number that probably cost another 10,000. She was laughing, holding onto Brad's arm as they navigated the sea of well-wishers. Brad looked like a king surveying his kingdom. He was shaking hands, clapping men on the back, acting the part of the benevolent host. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had already turned to quicksand. I watched as the head sommelier, a man named Arthur, who had worked for me for 15 years, approached the head table. He was pushing a cart loaded with vintage Dom Perignon. This was the toast. The moment Brad had been bragging about all week, the $20,000 champagne tower. Arthur stopped the cart a few feet from the groom. He didn't uncork a bottle. Instead, he pulled a leather folder from his apron. I leaned forward. The acoustics in the ballroom were designed to carry sound, but from this distance, I had to read the body language. Brad smiled at Arthur, extending a hand as if to say, "Pour the wine, my good man." Arthur didn't pour. He leaned in close and whispered something. I saw Brad's smile falter. It didn't disappear completely, but the corners of his mouth twitched. He laughed, a nervous staccato sound, and waved his hand dismissively. He pointed toward the back of the room, likely gesturing vaguely toward where he thought I would be sitting, or perhaps referencing the invisible credit line he thought he had. Arthur didn't move. He shook his head politely but firmly. He tapped the leather folder. Brad's face changed. The arrogance drained out of it, replaced by a flash of genuine confusion, followed immediately by irritation. He stood up, smoothing his tuxedo jacket, and stepped away from the table, pulling Arthur aside so the guests wouldn't hear. But I knew exactly what was being said.
Mr. Harrington, Arthur would be saying.
The credit card on file for the incidentals and the bar tab has been declined. The pre-authorization was revoked by the guarantor this morning. I watched Brad pull out his wallet. He produced a credit card, a gold one that shimmered under the lights. He thrust it at Arthur with an aggressive motion. Arthur took the card. He pulled a portable card reader from his pocket. He swiped it. He looked at the screen. He looked at Brad. He handed the card back. Declined. Brad snatched the card back, his face flushing a deep crimson that was visible even from the balcony. He was sweating now, tiny beads forming on his forehead. He pulled out another card. Then another. He was fumbling, dropping one on the floor, bending to pick it up with a lack of grace that betrayed his panic. Arthur tried them all. Swipe, wait, shake head. Swipe, wait, shake head. The guests at the nearby tables were starting to notice. The conversation nearest the groom paused. Eyes darted toward the scene. The champagne was sitting on ice unpoured. The glasses remained empty. Brad turned back to the head table. He looked at his parents, Charles and Linda. They were deep in conversation with a senator oblivious to their son's humiliation. Brad knew he couldn't ask them. He knew they were leveraged to the hilt just like him. If he asked his father for $20,000 cash right now, the entire facade of the Harrington dynasty would crack wide open. So he turned to the only other person he thought he could exploit. He walked back to Jasmine. He leaned down and whispered in her ear. I could see the tension in his neck, the way his jaw worked. Jasmine looked up at him, surprised. She frowned, shaking her head slightly. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the crowd nervously. She didn't want to deal with money on her wedding day. She wanted to be the princess. She wanted magic, not logistics. But Brad was insistent. He gripped her shoulder a little too hard. He whispered again, more urgently this time. I imagined the words. Babe, it is a bank error. My accounts are frozen because of the transfer for the house. Security protocols. You know how it is with big money. Just use your card, the one your dad fills. We will sort it out tomorrow. Jasmine sighed, the heavy sigh of a martyr. She reached for her clutch, which was sitting on the table next to her untouched meal. She pulled out the card. It was the supplementary card linked to my account. The account I had drained 3 days ago, leaving exactly $1.42. She handed it to Brad with a flourish, a gesture that said, "See, I can handle this." Brad took it like a lifeline. He practically ran back to Arthur, thrusting the card at him with a look of triumph. Arthur took the card. He swiped it. The little machine beeped. A harsh electronic sound that seemed to cut through the ambient jazz music. Arthur looked at the screen. He didn't shake his head this time. He looked directly at Brad and then past him at Jasmine. He walked over to the table. He didn't whisper this time. He spoke in a professional volume loud enough to be heard over the low hum of conversation. I am sorry, Mrs. Harrington, Arthur said, holding the card up. This card has also been declined. The terminal indicates insufficient funds. Jasmine froze. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. What did you say? She asked, her voice rising an octave. Insufficient funds, ma'am, Arthur repeated. The transaction for $20,000 cannot be processed. Jasmine laughed a high-pitched, nervous sound. That is impossible. My father puts money in that account every month. There is a limit, of course, but it should go through. Try it again. I tried it twice, ma'am. Arthur said, his face impassive. The balance is 0, or close enough to it. Jasmine stood up. She snatched the card from Arthur's hand and looked at it as if it had betrayed her. There must be a mistake, she hissed. My father. Where is my father? She started scanning the room frantically. She looked for the gray suit she had forbidden me to wear. She looked for the man she had called worthless. She needed that worthless man right now. She needed him to fix this. Brad grabbed her arm, pulling her close. His face was a mask of fury. You told me he had money, Brad whispered loud enough for the couple next to them to hear. You told me the card was good. We have people waiting for Champagne Jasmine. Do something. I do not know what happened, she stammered, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. He must have forgotten to transfer the funds. He is getting old, Brad. He is senile. He probably just forgot. Forgot, Brad snapped. How do you forget $20,000? Arthur cleared his throat. Sir, ma'am, Arthur said, the hotel policy is strict. For events of this magnitude, with the primary guarantor having withdrawn, we require payment in full for consumables upon delivery. If you cannot provide a valid form of payment, I cannot serve the champagne. In fact, I cannot serve the wine for the dinner service either. The wine, the expensive vintage bottles sitting on the tables. Jasmine turned pale. You mean we have no alcohol? We have water, ma'am, Arthur said, and soda, until payment is rendered. A hush started to spread outward from the head table like a ripple in a pond. The guests noticed the argument. They noticed the lack of drinks. They noticed the groom's red face and the bride's tears. Fix it, Brad hissed at Jasmine, pushing her slightly. Go find your father. Get his wallet. I do not care what you have to do. Fix it. Jasmine stumbled back in her expensive heels. She looked around the room, a trapped animal. She saw the judgmental stares of Brad's family. She saw the confusion of her friends, and then she saw me. I had stepped out of the shadows of the balcony. I was standing in the light, looking down at them. I was wearing my gray suit, my clip-on tie, my scuffed shoes. I held a glass of tap water in my hand. Our eyes locked across the ballroom. She looked at me with a mix of relief and fury. She waved her hand frantically, a gesture that meant, come here now. She pointed at her purse, then at me, miming a wallet. I didn't move. I didn't rush to her side. I didn't pull out my checkbook to save her from embarrassment. I raised my glass of water in a silent toast. I took a slow, deliberate sip. Then I turned my back on her and walked away from the railing, disappearing back into the darkness of the upper floor. I heard a scream from below. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, impotent rage. Dad. She shrieked, her voice cracking. Dad, come back here. But I was gone. And so was the champagne. Down on the floor, the reality was setting in. The waiters began to move through the room. They weren't pouring wine. They were removing the empty glasses, one by one. Clink, clink, clink. The sound was the death knell of the party. I walked back to the owner's suite where Clara and David were waiting. Phase 1 is complete, I said, sitting down in a leather armchair. They are thirsty. Clara checked her tablet. The band is asking for their check, sir. They are set to go on in 10 minutes. They want to know if the deposit has cleared. Tell them the truth, I said. Tell them the check bounced. Tell them to pack up. David looked at me, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. Isaiah, he said, you are really going to let this happen. You are going to let the band walk out. I looked at the monitor on the wall, which showed a live feed of the ballroom. I saw Brad screaming at a waiter. I saw Jasmine crying into her hands while her mother-in-law looked at her with pure disgust. They wanted to show David, I said. I am just changing the program. I leaned forward, watching the screen. Let the music stop, I said. Let them hear the silence. It is the only thing they are going to understand. The silence in the ballroom wasn't absolute, but it was suffocating. The low hum of conversation had shifted from polite small talk to confused murmurs. Guests were looking around, searching for servers who were conspicuously absent. The tables were set with crystal glasses that remained stubbornly empty, save for the carafes of tap water that had been placed there before the doors opened. It was 7 o'clock. Dinner should have been served by now. The first course, a lobster bisque that cost $30 a bowl, was nowhere to be seen. I watched from a table in the back corner far away from the head table, but with a clear line of sight. I had come down from the owner's suite. I needed to see this up close. I needed to see the moment the illusion finally broke. Jasmine was sitting at the head table, her face pale and drawn. She was whispering furiously to Brad, who was on his phone, likely trying to reach his bank or perhaps his bookie. His parents, Charles and Linda, were staring straight ahead, their smiles frozen in place like rictus masks trying to pretend that drinking tap water at a black tie wedding was a chic new trend. Then the lights dimmed slightly, a spotlight hit the stage. The guests turned, expecting the music to start. The band, the Midnight Symphony, was legendary. They were a 12-piece orchestra known for playing at presidential inaugurations and charity galas. I had paid a $15,000 deposit to secure them 6 months ago. The band leader, a man named Marcus, stood center stage. He was wearing a tuxedo, holding a microphone. Behind him, the musicians were not picking up their instruments. They were putting them away. The drummer was packing his cymbals into their cases. The cellist was zipping up her soft case. The trumpet player was wiping down his horn. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice echoing through the silent room, "I apologize for the interruption, but due to a contractual issue, the Midnight Symphony will not be performing tonight." A collective gasp went through the room. "What do you mean?" Jasmine shrieked, jumping up from her seat. "We have a contract. My father paid the deposit." Marcus looked at her, his expression professional, but cold. "The deposit was revoked this morning, ma'am," he said into the mic, ensuring everyone heard. "The guarantor withdrew the funds, and since the remaining balance of $10,000 was not paid upon arrival as stipulated in our rider, we are leaving." "Withdrew the funds?" Jasmine repeated, her voice trembling. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus confirmed. The check bounced, or rather, the wire transfer was recalled. "We do not play for free. Good evening." He placed the microphone back on the stand. It let out a high-pitched feedback squeal that made everyone wince. Then he turned and walked off stage, followed by his entire band. The stage was empty. The room was silent save for the clatter of equipment being wheeled away. Panic set in. It wasn't the panic of a fire or an emergency. It was the social panic of the elite realizing they were trapped in a disaster. The whispers grew louder. Did he say the check bounced? Who is the guarantor? Is there no food either? Jasmine looked around the room, her eyes wide with terror. She saw the judgmental stares of her new in-laws. She saw her friends checking their phones, probably texting about the train wreck unfolding before them. And then she saw me. I was sitting at my small table in the back, sipping my glass of water. I wasn't hiding. I was watching. She moved. It wasn't a walk. It was a run. She gathered her silk skirt in her hands and sprinted across the ballroom floor, her heels clicking like gunshots on the parquet. Brad was right behind her, his face a mask of red fury. They reached my table, breathless and shaking. "Dad," she screamed, slamming her hands down on the table, causing my water glass to jump. "What the hell is going on? Why is the band leaving? Why is my card declined? What did you do?" I looked up at her. She was beautiful in her designer dress, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless. But her eyes were ugly, filled with entitlement and rage. I took a slow sip of water. It was cool and refreshing. "I didn't do anything, Jasmine," I said calmly. "I just stopped doing everything." "What does that mean?" Brad shouted, looming over me. "You agreed to pay for this. You signed the contracts." "I did. I agreed." But then I remembered something. I looked at Jasmine. "You told me my life was nothing to be proud of." I said, my voice low but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. "You told me I was small time. You told me I was an embarrassment." So Jasmine scoffed. "That was just talk. We were stressed. You are my father. You are supposed to help me. You are supposed to pay for my wedding. Supposed to..." I asked, "Is that written in stone somewhere, or is that just another one of your expectations?" I stood up slowly, facing them. I was still wearing my cheap gray suit, but I stood tall. "You said my life was worthless, Jasmine," I continued. "You said I was nothing but a servant. Well, if my life is worthless, then my money must be worthless too." "Right." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a goldfish. "If I am just a janitor to you," I said, "why would you want a janitor's money paying for your royal wedding? It would taint, wouldn't it? It would make it cheap." "Dad, stop it," she hissed, looking around to see who was listening. "You are making a scene. Just give them the money. Fix this. People are staring. Let them stare, I said. Let them see. You canceled the payments, Brad accused, pointing a shaking finger at me. You canceled the venue, the flowers, the band. You sabotaged us. I didn't sabotage you, Brad, I said. I liberated you. You are a big man, right? A Harrington. You build things. You own things. Surely a man of your stature can cover a little wedding bill. Brad turned purple. I told you my assets are tied up. Tied up in what I asked. Gambling debts. Or maybe in that loan you took out in Jasmine's name without her knowing. The color drained from Jasmine's face instantly. She looked at Brad. What loan, she whispered. Brad looked like he had been slapped. He stepped back. He is lying, Jasmine. He is a crazy old man. He does not know what he is talking about. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the credit report David had given me. I unfolded it and placed it on the table. Read it, Jasmine, I said. She looked down. She saw her name. She saw the amount. $200,000. She saw the date, 3 weeks ago. She looked at Brad. You took out a loan, she said, her voice barely a whisper. In my name. Babe, it was for us, Brad stammered, sweat pouring down his face. For the business, for our future. I was going to pay it back. With what I asked. With the money from selling my house. Jasmine looked at me, then back at Brad. The realization was dawning on her. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place. The pressure to sell the house, the rush to get married, the refusal to let me see the financials. You were going to sell his house, she said to Brad. To pay your debt, and you were going to let him, I reminded her. You were going to throw me into a nursing home to help him do it. You called me worthless while you were plotting to strip me of everything I owned. Jasmine stepped back, looking from me to Brad. Her world was cracking. The fairy tale was dissolving into a horror story. But Dad, she said, tears streaming down her face, why did you cancel the wedding? Why did you humiliate me like this? You could have just told me. Told you I asked. Would you have listened? Or would you have called me jealous? Would you have called me cheap? Would you have believed the old man over the prince? She didn't answer. She knew the answer. I needed you to see him, I said, pointing at Brad. I needed you to see him when the money stopped. I needed you to see how he treats you when he cannot use you. Look at him, Jasmine. Look at the man you are marrying. Brad was shaking with rage. You ruined everything, you old bastard, he shouted. You think you are so smart. You are nothing. You are a nobody. I am the man paying the bill, I said. Or rather, I was. Now the bill is due, Brad, and you are holding the check. Just then the ballroom doors opened. But it wasn't the caterers with the food. It was Clara Vance, accompanied by 2 large security guards and a man in a suit I recognized. It was the hotel's legal counsel. They walked straight toward our little group. The guests parted like the Red Sea, sensing the climax of the drama. Mr. Harrington, Clara said, her voice cutting through the tension. We have a problem. Since the primary funding source has been withdrawn, we need to settle the account immediately. The current outstanding balance for the venue rental, the floral arrangements which are already installed, and the food preparation which is already underway is $185,000. She held out a portable payment terminal. We accept all major credit cards, or a certified cashier's check. Brad looked at the machine. He looked at his parents, who were pointedly looking at the ceiling. He looked at Jasmine, who was sobbing. I do not have it, he whispered. Clara didn't blink. Then I am afraid I have to ask you and your guests to vacate the premises immediately. The event is canceled. Canceled, Jasmine wailed. But we are already here. Everyone is here. I am sorry, ma'am, Clara said, not sounding sorry at all. But the Grand Plaza is a business. We do not operate on credit, especially not with clients who have a history of default. She looked at Brad. We ran your credit, sir, she said. It seems you have several outstanding liens. We cannot extend you any courtesy. The room erupted. Guests started standing up, grabbing their purses. The murmur of confusion turned into a roar of outrage. This is a disaster, someone shouted. Worst wedding ever, another voice called out. Brad turned on me, his eyes wild. This is your fault. You planned this. You wanted to destroy me. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't destroy you, Brad, I said. I just turned on the lights. You destroyed yourself. I picked up my water glass and finished it. Now, if you will excuse me, I said, I have a dinner reservation at a place that accepts my money. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their own greed. Jasmine's sobs followed me, echoing off the high ceilings. Brad's curses faded into the background noise of 100 rich people realizing they weren't getting fed. I walked toward the stage, toward the microphone the band leader had left behind. I wasn't done yet. I had one more truth to tell, and I wanted everyone to hear it. The chaos in the ballroom had reached a fever pitch. The air was thick with the perfume of wealthy women and the sweat of panicked men. Guests were standing by their tables, clutching their handbags and whispering furiously, their eyes darting between the empty stage and the head table where the groom looked like he was about to vomit. The beautiful illusion of the Harrington wedding had dissolved, leaving behind only the ugly scaffolding of debt and deceit. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, my hands clasped behind my back, watching the scene unfold with the patience of a man who had waited 40 years for this moment. I saw Clara Vance walk up the steps to the stage. She moved with a grace that demanded attention, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood. She didn't look like a hotel manager dealing with a billing dispute. She looked like a judge walking to the bench to deliver a death sentence. She reached the center of the stage and took the microphone from the stand. The feedback whined for a split second, a sharp electronic shriek that cut through the murmurs like a knife. The room fell instantly silent. It wasn't the respectful silence of a toast. It was the terrified silence of a crowd that knows a disaster is imminent. 150 faces turned toward her. Clara looked out over the crowd, her expression unreadable. She didn't smile. She didn't apologize with her body language. She stood tall, a pillar of authority in a room full of crumbling egos. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice amplified and crystal clear, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "May I have your attention, please?" She paused, letting the weight of her presence settle over the room. I saw Jasmine look up, her mascara running down her cheeks, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and dread. She probably thought Clara was going to announce a solution, a miracle, a reprieve. "I regret to inform you," Clara continued, her voice devoid of warmth, "that the event scheduled for this evening has been officially canceled, effective immediately." A gasp rippled through the room, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the air. Canceled. The word hung there, heavy and final. "Furthermore," she said, raising her voice slightly to be heard over the rising tide of murmurs, "we ask that all guests vacate the premises in an orderly fashion. The bar is closed. The kitchen is closed, and the doors will be locked in 30 minutes. "This is an outrage," Charles Harrington shouted from the head table, standing up and knocking over his chair. "Do you know who I am? I will have your job for this." Clara turned her gaze to him, cool and dismissive. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Harrington," she said, "and I know exactly what your credit score is, which brings me to the reason for this cancellation." She looked back at the crowd, addressing them directly. "This event has been terminated due to a flagrant breach of contract and attempted financial fraud on the part of the groom, Mr. Bradford Harrington." The room exploded. The word fraud acted like a grenade dropped in the center of the dance floor. People turned to each other, their mouths agape, their whispers turning into shouts. Fraud. The Harringtons. The dynasty. It was impossible, and yet it was happening right in front of them. Brad looked like he had been electrocuted. His face went from red to a sickly gray. He looked at the guests, his friends, his business partners, the people he had tried so hard to impress. He saw their expressions shifting from confusion to judgment. He saw his reputation incinerating in real time. "You bitch!" he screamed. The sound was raw and primal. He lunged away from the table, knocking over a centerpiece. Water and white orchids crashed to the floor. "You cannot do this!" he roared, sprinting toward the stage. "You are lying! I will kill you!" He moved fast, fueled by adrenaline and the terrified realization that his life was over. He scrambled up the stairs to the stage, his hands reaching for the microphone, his eyes wild. He wanted to silence her. He wanted to stop the truth from spreading. He wanted to take control of the narrative one last time. But he never made it. From the shadows of the wings, two men stepped out. They were not hotel security. They were not the polite young men in blazers who checked IDs at the door. These men were large-built like linebackers wearing dark suits that strained against their muscles. They were private security professionals, the kind I hired to protect my construction sites in the 80s, the kind who didn't ask questions and didn't hesitate. They intercepted Brad before he got within 5 feet of Clara. One of them grabbed Brad's arm, twisting it behind his back with a practiced efficiency. The other placed a large hand on Brad's chest, stopping his momentum cold. "Get off me!" Brad shrieked, struggling uselessly against their grip. "Do you know who I am? I am a Harrington. "You are a trespasser," the guard said, his voice low and bored. "And you are disturbing the peace." They held him there center stage, a prisoner in his own tuxedo. The guests watched in horrified fascination. Phones were out recording everything. This wasn't just a ruined wedding, it was a viral moment, a social execution broadcast live. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't even take a step back. She waited for Brad to stop thrashing. She waited for the room to quiet down again. She waited until every single eye was fixed on her. She raised the microphone again. "Mr. Harrington seems to be under the impression that his family name holds currency here," she said. "However, the Grand Plaza operates on facts, not fairy tales. And the fact is that the check presented for this evening was drawn on an account with insufficient funds." Liar, Brad shouted, spitting as he spoke. "My investors, the wire transfer, it is a delay. There is no delay." Clara cut him off. "There are no investors. There is only debt." She looked out at the crowd, scanning the faces until she found Jasmine. My daughter was standing by the table, paralyzed, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She looked small, defeated. And to clarify one final point, Clara said, her voice softening just a fraction, but gaining a new kind of intensity. This decision to cancel was not made lightly. It was made at the direct instruction of the owner of this establishment. "The owner?" Someone whispered near me. I thought it was a corporation. "The owner," Clara continued, "has a zero-tolerance policy for scammers. He does not allow his venue to be used to entrap young women into fraudulent financial agreements. He does not allow his staff to be abused, and he certainly does not allow his hospitality to be taken for granted." "Who is the owner?" Brad spat, struggling against the guards. "Some faceless hedge fund manager. I will sue him. I will sue everyone." Clara smiled. It was a small, cold smile. "The owner is not a hedge fund, Mr. Harrington. The owner is a man who built this building from the foundation up. A man who owns 5 other properties in this city. A man who has more integrity in his little finger than you have in your entire body." She gestured toward the back of the room, toward the shadows where I had been standing. "The owner is Mr. Isaiah Jefferson." The name hung in the air. Isaiah Jefferson. For a moment there was silence. Absolute, total silence. The guests looked around, confused. They knew the name Jefferson. It was the bride's maiden name. But Isaiah, that was the father. That was the old man in the gray suit. That was the janitor. Jasmine's head snapped up. She looked at Clara, then she turned slowly, looking into the darkness at the back of the hall. "No," she whispered. "That is impossible." Brad stopped struggling. He went limp in the guard's grip. He stared at Clara, his mouth open, his eyes wide with shock. "Isaiah," he croaked. "The old man. He is broke. He is a nobody." Clara looked at him with pity. "Mr. Jefferson is the majority shareholder of the Grand Plaza Hotel Group," she said. "He bought this building 15 years ago when it was a failing, distressed asset. He renovated it. He restored it, and he has been signing my paychecks ever since." She paused, letting the reality sink in. "He is also the man who paid for your flowers, your music, and your honeymoon," she added. "Until this morning, when he decided that you were not worthy of his generosity." The room erupted again, but this time the sound was different. It wasn't anger, it was shock. Pure, unadulterated shock. The guests turned, looking for me, scanning the room with new eyes. They weren't looking for the help anymore. They were looking for the billionaire who had been hiding in plain sight. I saw Charles Harrington slump into his chair, his face white as a sheet. He realized in that moment that he had spent the entire evening insulting the man who could buy and sell him 10 times over. He realized he had mocked the shark while swimming in his tank. Jasmine stood there trembling. She looked at the expensive chandeliers. She looked at the marble floors. She looked at the opulence surrounding her. And she realized that all of it belonged to the man she had called worthless, the man she had banned from her wedding photos, the man she had tried to rob. She realized that she had been standing on a gold mine her entire life, and she had been too busy looking up at the sky to notice the ground beneath her feet. I stepped out of the shadows then. I walked slowly toward the stage, my cheap shoes making a dull thud on the carpet. The guests parted for me. They moved aside quickly, creating a wide path. They looked at me with awe, with fear, with respect. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes fixed on the stage, on the man who had called me a servant, on the daughter who had betrayed me. I walked up the stairs. The guards stepped back, still holding Brad, but giving me space. Clara handed me the microphone. I took it. It felt heavy in my hand, familiar, like a hammer. I looked out at the sea of faces. I looked at the luxury I had built. And then I looked at my daughter. She was staring at me as if she had never seen me before, and in a way she hadn't. I brought the microphone to my lips. The feedback whined again, but I didn't flinch. "I am Isaiah Jefferson," I said, my voice booming through the hall. "And I think it is time we had a little talk about value." I stood center stage, the wooden floorboards firm beneath my cheap, scuffed shoes. For 40 years, I had walked with a stoop, the physical memory of carrying heavy loads and bending into tight spaces to fix what was broken. I had walked with my head down, not out of shame, but out of the habit of a man who watches where he steps. But as I gripped the microphone, the stoop vanished. My spine straightened, my shoulders squared. The years of labor hadn't weakened me, they had forged me into iron. The gray polyester suit didn't matter anymore. The clip-on tie didn't matter. In that moment, I wasn't Isaiah the janitor or Isaiah the road worker. I was Isaiah Jefferson, the man who owned the building, the man who signed the checks, and the man who was about to bring the gavel down. I looked out at the sea of faces. 150 of New York's so-called elite. People who judged value by the cut of a lapel or the brand of a watch. They were silent now, waiting. Their eyes were wide fixed on the spectacle. They sensed blood in the water. "You all heard Mr. Harrington speak earlier," I said, my voice booming through the high-quality sound system I had paid for. "You heard him toast to his legacy. You heard him talk about the Harrington dynasty. He told you that his family builds things, that they own things. He told you that they were taking over because I could not afford to give my daughter the life she deserves." I paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. I looked down at Brad, still held firmly by my security guards. He had stopped struggling. He was staring up at me, his face the color of old ash. He knew what was coming. "He told you that he paid for this night," I continued, my voice dropping an octave, becoming harder, colder. "He told you that this champagne, this food, these flowers were a gift from the Harrington fortune." I shook my head slowly. That was a lie. I gestured to the tech booth at the back of the room where one of my employees was waiting for the signal. "Clara, if you please," I said. Behind me, a massive LED screen descended from the ceiling. It was 20 feet wide, intended to display a montage of childhood photos and romantic moments set to sentimental music. It was meant to show the fairy tale. Instead, the screen flickered to life with a stark, blinding white light. A document appeared. It was magnified so clearly that people in the back row could read the fine print. "This is the invoice for the venue rental," I said, pointing to the screen without looking back. $50,000, paid in full 6 months ago. The image changed. "This is the invoice for the floral arrangements, $20,000. Imported orchids, paid 3 months ago." The image changed again. "The Midnight Symphony Orchestra, $15,000. The catering deposit, $35,000. The honeymoon suite in the Maldives, $65,000. I turned back to the crowd. "Do you see the name on the bottom of those checks?" I asked. "Do you see the signature authorizing those wire transfers?" A murmur rippled through the room as people squinted and read. "It does not say Harrington," I roared, my voice shaking the crystal glasses on the tables. "It says Jefferson, Isaiah Jefferson, the man you laughed at, the man you called a servant, the man you thought was worthless." I walked to the edge of the stage, looking directly at Charles and Linda Harrington. They were shrinking in their seats, trying to make themselves small, trying to disappear. "I paid $185,000 for this party," I said. "I paid every single dime. I did it quietly. I did it without asking for credit. I did it because I loved my daughter, and I wanted her to be happy even if she was marrying a fool." I looked at Jasmine. She was standing frozen like a statue carved from ice. Her hands were covering her mouth, but her eyes were locked on the screen. She was seeing the receipts. She was seeing the proof of my love, and her betrayal projected 20 feet high. "But that is just the beginning," I said. "Because if we are going to talk about finances, if we are going to talk about who can afford what we need to look at the whole picture." I signaled the booth again. "You see, Brad here wanted you to believe he is a titan of industry, a crypto genius, a builder." The screen changed. The white background was replaced by a wall of red text. It was a credit report, but not just any credit report. It was a forensic accounting breakdown of Bradford Harrington's financial life. "This is the reality," I said. The numbers were staggering. They were displayed in bold crimson font, impossible to ignore. Credit card debt, $320,000. The crowd gasped. It was a visceral sound, a collective intake of breath. That was not a normal amount of debt. That was a lifestyle sustained by delusion. I walked them through it like a professor teaching a class on failure. 7 maxed-out cards I listed, interest rates hovering around 22%, cash advances taken out to pay minimum balances on other cards. It is a house of cards, folks, and the wind is blowing. The screen shifted again. Gambling losses, $150,000. Online poker, I said. Sports betting. High-stakes tables in Atlantic City where he pretended to be a high roller while betting with money he did not have. Brad let out a strangled cry from the floor. "Stop it!" he begged, his voice cracking. "You cannot do this. That is private. Privacy is a luxury for people who pay their bills, Brad," I snapped. "You lost your right to privacy when you tried to steal my house to cover your losses." I pointed to the bottom of the screen where a single number was highlighted in a black box. Net worth negative $470,000. "He is not a millionaire," I said. "He is a liability. He is drowning." And he was looking for a life raft. I turned my gaze to Charles and Linda Harrington. They were holding hands, gripping each other as if they were on a crashing plane. "And the apple does not fall far from the tree," I said. The screen changed one last time. It showed a foreclosure notice. It was a legal document from the state of Connecticut. Notice of default property of Charles and Linda Harrington. Third notice. "They are losing their house," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "They have refinanced 3 times. They are months behind on their mortgage. They came here tonight hoping to land a whale. They were hoping that my daughter had a rich father, or that I had property they could leverage. They were not here to celebrate a marriage. They were here to execute a merger, a hostile takeover of my assets to save their own skins." Linda Harrington let out a soft wail. Her eyes rolled back in her head. She slumped sideways in her chair, her expensive jewelry clattering against the table. It was a theatrical feint, a desperate attempt to escape the humiliation to stop the assault of truth. Charles grabbed her, fanning her face with a menu, his face a mask of absolute terror. "Call a doctor," someone shouted. "She does not need a doctor," I said coldly. "She needs a bankruptcy attorney." I looked at Jasmine. She hadn't moved. She hadn't gone to help her mother-in-law. She was staring at the screen, staring at the red numbers that defined the man she had just pledged her life to. The dress I had paid for the $15,000 Vera Wang silk seemed to hang heavy on her now. It wasn't a wedding dress anymore. It was a costume, a prop in a play that had just been canceled. She looked at Brad. He was slumped in the arms of the guards, defeated, broken, exposed. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was a fraud, a gambler, a liar. And then she looked at me. And she, for the first time in years, she really looked at me. She didn't see the gray suit. She didn't see the cheap tie. She saw the man who had just dismantled an entire family with a few sheets of paper and a projector. She saw the power I had hidden. She saw the protection I had provided. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the commotion of the guests, realizing they were in the middle of a war zone. I didn't answer her. Not yet. I wasn't done teaching. I looked out at the crowd one last time. "You all laughed at me," I said. "You laughed at my clothes. You laughed at my history. You thought because I work with my hands, because I know the value of $1, that I was beneath you." I swept my hand across the room, encompassing the chandeliers, the velvet, the luxury. "I bought all of this," I said. "I built this empire while you were buying status symbols on credit. I own the ground you are standing on." I took a deep breath. The anger was gone now, replaced by a hollow emptiness. "Money is loud," I said quietly. "But wealth is quiet. You all listen to the noise, and you miss the truth." I placed the microphone back on the stand. The clunk echoed through the silent room. "The lesson is over," I said. I walked down the stairs from the stage. I didn't look at Brad. I didn't look at the Harringtons. I walked straight toward my daughter. She stood there alone in the center of the wreckage. The guests were backing away, giving us a wide berth as if we were radioactive. I stopped in front of her, close enough to see the tears ruining her makeup, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. She reached out a hand, trembling. "Dad, I didn't know." I looked at her hand, the hand that had signed the credit card receipts for her party in Vegas. The hand that had pointed a finger in my face and told me not to come. "I know you didn't know Jasmine," I said. Because you never looked, you never asked. You were too busy looking in the mirror. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It was the wedding gift I had planned to give her before everything fell apart. It wasn't money. It wasn't a check. It was her mother's locket, the one Ruth had worn every day, the one with a picture of Jasmine as a baby inside. I placed it in her hand. She wanted you to have this on your wedding day, I said. She wanted you to remember where you came from. Jasmine clutched the locket to her chest and sobbed, a raw, ugly sound of regret. I stepped back. Good luck, Jasmine, I said. You are going to need it. I turned and walked away toward the exit. The gray suit felt lighter now. The shoes didn't pinch as much. I walked past the stunned guests, past the fainting mother-in-law, past the ruined groom. I walked out of the ballroom and into the cool night air of the city I helped build. I was alone. But for the first time in a long time, I was free. The truth was out. And it had set me free. The ballroom was emptying out, but the air was still heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and disaster. The guests had retreated to the lobby, their murmurs fading like the tide, leaving only the wreckage of the evening behind. I stood at the edge of the stage, my hand resting on the microphone stand, looking down at my daughter. Jasmine was weeping. It wasn't the soft, elegant crying of a movie star. It was the ugly, heaving sobbing of a child who has broken her favorite toy and realized it cannot be fixed. Her makeup was smeared across her cheeks in black streaks. Her $15,000 dress was crumpled. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Dad," she wailed, her voice echoing in the empty hall. "How could you do this to me? How could you humiliate me like this in front of everyone?" I looked at her unmoved. I didn't see my little girl anymore. I saw a stranger in a white dress. "I didn't do this to you, Jasmine," I said, my voice calm and cold. "You did this to yourself, too. You built a castle on a foundation of lies, and you are surprised it collapsed." I didn't know, she screamed, stamping her foot like a petulant teenager. "I swear to God, Dad, I didn't know he was broke. I didn't know about the gambling. I didn't know about the debts. I thought he was rich. I thought he loved me." I stepped down from the stage, walking slowly toward her. My footsteps were the only sound in the room. "You didn't know he was in debt," I repeated. "Maybe. Maybe you were blind to his faults because you were too busy looking at his last name. But do not lie to me, Jasmine. Do not stand there and tell me you were innocent." "I was," she insisted, grabbing my arm. "I was a victim too, Dad. He lied to me. He used me. He used you," I agreed, pulling my arm away from her grasp. "But you were more than happy to be used as long as it got you into the country club. And you were more than happy to use me to pay the admission fee." "What are you talking about?" she asked, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen, bringing up the audio file I had saved, the one from the phone call just a week ago, the one where she had dropped the mask completely. "You say you didn't know he needed money," I said, "then explain this." I pressed play. The volume was turned up all the way. Jasmine's voice, shrill and demanding, filled the space between us. "Dad, stop being so selfish. We need that house. We need the equity. Brad has a business deal that cannot wait. If you do not sign that deed over to us by Friday, you are never going to see your grandchildren. Do you hear me? You will die alone in that rotting house." Jasmine froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her ghostly pale. She stared at the phone as if it were a snake. I was just stressed," she stammered. "I didn't mean it." I let the recording play out. Then I swiped to the next file. This one was from the rehearsal dinner just last night. I had left my phone recording on the table when I went to the restroom. It captured the conversation she had with her bridesmaids while I was out of earshot. "God, he is so embarrassing," her voice sneered from the speaker. "Look at that suit. He looks like a hobo. I cannot wait until this wedding is over and we get the deed. Once we sell that dump in Brooklyn, we are putting him in a state facility, somewhere cheap. Brad says we can use the money to upgrade to the penthouse. Finally, I will be rid of him." I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the ceiling beams. Jasmine looked at me. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. There was no defense for that. There was no spinning it. It was pure, unadulterated malice. "You didn't know he was poor," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "But you knew I was old. You knew I was... What did you call me, worthless? You knew I had a house that you could sell to pay off his debts." I stepped closer into her personal space. "You were going to sell my home, Jasmine. The home your mother and I built. The home where you took your first steps. You were going to sell it to pay for his gambling losses. And then you were going to throw me into a state home to rot. No, Dad, she whispered, shaking her head frantically. It wasn't like that. Brad said it would be a nice home. He said you would be happy. Brad lied, I snapped. And you believed him because it was convenient. You wanted the penthouse, Jasmine. You wanted the status, and the price tag was my life. You were willing to trade your father for a zip code. She fell to her knees, her white dress pooling around her on the dirty floor. Dad, please. I made a mistake. I was stupid. But I am your daughter. You cannot leave me like this. You cannot leave me with nothing. I looked down at her. I remembered the day she was born. I remembered holding her tiny hand, promising to protect her from the world. I had failed. I had protected her too much. I had sheltered her from the consequences of her actions until she thought she was immune to them. I reached into my jacket pocket again. I pulled out a folded document. It was the paper she had forced me to sign yesterday morning, the one she had brought to the house with a notary she had paid off. She looked up at the paper, hope flickering in her eyes. The deed, she breathed. You signed it. You still have it. I unfolded the paper slowly. You came to my house yesterday morning, I said. You brought a man you said was a notary. You screamed at me. You threatened me. You told me that if I didn't sign the transfer papers right then and there, you would cut me out of your life forever. She nodded, wiping her tears. I was desperate, Dad. Brad said we needed it for the bank. So I signed it, I said. I signed the paper you put in front of me. I didn't read it. Or at least you thought I didn't. I held the document up so she could see the header. But you made a mistake, Jasmine. You were so eager, so arrogant that you didn't check the paperwork your own fiancé gave you. Brad didn't give you a transfer deed. He gave you a standard power of attorney form that David Cohen, my lawyer, had switched out on the table while you were arguing with me. She blinked, confused. What? And the document I actually signed, I continued pulling a second paper from behind the first, is this. I handed it to her. It was a legal document titled Irrevocable Waiver of Inheritance and Beneficiary Rights. Read it, I said. Her eyes scanned the page, darting back and forth. Her hands started to shake so hard the paper rattled. I, Isaiah Jefferson, being of sound mind and body, hereby remove Jasmine Jefferson from all wills, trusts, and insurance policies. Furthermore, by signing below, the recipient acknowledges receipt of a lump sum payment of $185,000 paid in the form of wedding expenses as full and final settlement of any and all future claims to my estate. She looked up at me, horror dawning on her face. What does this mean? She whispered. It means I paid for your wedding, I said. And that is your inheritance. You wanted a big party, Jasmine. You wanted to show the world how rich you were. Well, you got it. That $185,000 I spent on the flowers, you didn't smell the food you didn't eat, and the band you didn't hear. That was your share. No, she screamed, crumpling the paper. No, you cannot do this. You have millions. You have buildings. You cannot cut me off. I can, I said. And I did. You signed it too, Jasmine. Remember, you thought you were signing as a witness to the deed transfer. You were signing away your future. She looked at her signature at the bottom of the page. It was there, clear as day. You tricked me, she wailed. You tricked your own daughter. I taught you a lesson I corrected. You tried to steal my house. You tried to erase me, so I erased you from my will. It seems fair. She looked around the empty ballroom, the ruined flowers, the overturned chairs. She looked at Brad, who was being handcuffed by the police in the corner of the room, his tuxedo torn, his face bloody. She looked at her in-laws, who were fleeing out the side exit like rats leaving a sinking ship. And then she looked back at me. I have nothing, she whispered. Brad is going to jail. His parents are broke. I have debt in my name that I didn't even know about. Dad, I have nowhere to go. I looked at her. I felt a twinge of pain deep in my chest. She was still my child. But I knew that if I helped her now, if I picked her up and dusted her off, she would never learn. She would never change. She would wait for me to die, and then she would squander whatever I left her. You have your education, I said. You have your health, and you have the opportunity to start over. I cannot start over, she sobbed. I am ruined. Everyone saw this. Everyone knows. Good, I said. Then you have nothing to hide anymore. You can stop pretending. You can stop trying to be a Harrington and start trying to be a decent human being. I turned away from her. I couldn't look at her anymore. The pity was starting to curdle into disgust. Dad, wait, she called out, scrambling to her feet. "Where are you going?" "I am going home, Jasmine," I said without looking back. "To my drafty old house in Brooklyn. The one you hate, the one that is still mine." I walked toward the exit, my footsteps heavy but steady. "And Jasmine," I added, pausing at the door, "do not bother coming by. I am changing the locks tonight." I pushed open the heavy double doors and walked out into the cool night air. Behind me, I heard my daughter screaming my name one last time, but I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I had given her exactly what she asked for, a life without me. And now, she was going to have to live it. The heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open again, but this time it wasn't a dramatic exit. It was a tactical entry. The air in the room shifted instantly from the tension of a family dispute to the terrifying clarity of a criminal raid. 4 uniformed NYPD officers marched in their hands, resting on their belts, their eyes scanning the room with practiced indifference until they locked onto the man in the torn tuxedo cowering by the stage. Behind them walked 2 men in plain clothes wearing badges on their belts and carrying the unmistakable aura of federal agents. And behind them all walked David Cohen, my lawyer, looking grim and satisfied. I stopped at the threshold, my hand still on the brass handle of the door. I turned back. I had to see this. I had to see the final brick being laid in the wall of justice I had built. Bradford Harrington saw them coming. For a split second, I saw the instinct to run flash across his face. He looked toward the service entrance. He looked toward the windows. But then he looked at the sheer size of the room and the distance he would have to cover, and he slumped. The fight went out of him like air leaving a punctured tire. He didn't look like a titan of industry anymore. He looked like exactly what he was. A desperate boy playing a man's game with money he didn't have. One of the detectives stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal caught the light of the chandeliers, a stark cold glint against the warm gold of the room. Bradford Harrington, the detective, said, his voice carrying easily over the stunned silence of the few remaining guests. "You are under arrest." Brad let out a laugh, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Arrest," he choked out. "For what?" "For a bounced check. My father will fix it. Dad, tell them. Tell them it is a misunderstanding." He looked around for Charles, but his father was nowhere to be seen. Charles and Linda had slipped out the side door the moment the credit report hit the screen, leaving their son to face the wolves alone. "You are not being arrested for a bounced check, son," the detective said, snapping the cuffs onto Brad's wrists. The click was loud. "Final. You are being arrested for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and forgery in the first degree." Brad struggled slightly, wincing as the metal bit into his skin. "Forgery," he spat. "I never forged anything." "We have the documents, Brad," the detective said calmly. "We have the loan application you submitted to the First National Bank last week, the one where you used Isaiah Jefferson's name and social security number to attempt to secure a $500,000 line of credit. And we have the digital forensic report proving you signed his name electronically from your IP address." I watched Jasmine. She was standing 10 feet away from him, her hands trembling by her sides. Her head snapped up at the mention of my name. She looked at Brad with a new kind of horror. It was one thing to steal from her. It was another to try and steal my identity, to bury me in debt before I was even in the ground. "You tried to frame my father," she whispered. Brad didn't look at her. He was looking at the detective, sweating profusely. "That is a lie," he shouted, pulling against the cuffs. "I had permission. He said I could. He is senile. He forgot." "We also have the statement from your bookie," the detective continued, ignoring Brad's outburst. "He was very cooperative when we picked him up this morning. He told us all about the collateral you promised him. You told him you were getting the deed to a property in Brooklyn today. You told him the owner was incompetent and wouldn't notice. The walls were closing in on him. The lies were collapsing one by one, burying him under their weight." Brad looked around the room, his eyes wild and darting. He looked for an escape. He looked for a scapegoat. And his eyes landed on Jasmine. His face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. The charm was gone. The romance was gone. There was only the viciousness of a cornered rat. "It is her fault," he screamed, lunging toward Jasmine before the officers yanked him back. Jasmine recoiled, stumbling back in her wedding dress, her hands flying up to protect her face. "She told me to do it," Brad roared, his voice cracking. "She told me the old man was dying. She said he had a bad heart. She said he wouldn't last the year." The words hit Jasmine like physical blows. She shook her head, her mouth opening in a silent scream of denial. "Liar," she gasped. "She told me I would get the assets," Brad continued, shouting over her, spitting on the expensive floor. "She said all we had to do was get the ring on her finger and wait for him to kick the bucket. She said he was useless. She said he was a servant. She said he was just a placeholder until the real owners took over." He turned his gaze to me. I was standing by the door, still as a statue. "She hates you, old man." He laughed, a cruel, broken sound. "She laughs at you behind your back. She mimics the way you walk. She told me you smell like cheap soap and failure. She promised me the money. She promised me the house. She scammed me just as much as I scammed her." The detective shoved Brad forward, forcing him toward the exit. "That is enough, Harrington. You can tell it to the judge." But Brad wouldn't stop. He twisted his head back, screaming at Jasmine as he was dragged away. "You are nothing without him, Jasmine. You are just a broke girl from Brooklyn in a dress you do not own. I should have married a real heiress. I wasted my time on you. You told me he was worthless, but you are the one who is worth nothing." The officers pushed him through the side doors, and his voice was finally cut off, leaving a ringing silence in his wake. Jasmine stood alone in the center of the ballroom. She looked small. She looked shattered. The white dress was a mockery, now a costume for a play that had ended in tragedy. She was trembling violently, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She looked at the empty doorway where her husband had just been dragged out in chains. The man she had chosen over me. The man she had defended when I questioned him. The man she had conspired with to take my home. He had just thrown her to the wolves to save himself. He had just confirmed everything I had tried to show her. He never loved her. He loved the potential of my death. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head. She looked across the empty expanse of the dance floor. She looked past the overturned chairs and the ruined flowers. She looked at me. I was still standing by the main doors. I hadn't moved. I hadn't spoken. I was wearing my gray polyester suit, the one she despised. My hands were clasped in front of me. My posture was straight. I wasn't the hunched-over worker she had mocked. I wasn't the embarrassing dad she had tried to hide. I was the man who had built the building she was standing in. I was the man who had paid the bills she couldn't afford. I was the man who had seen the truth when she was blind. To her in that moment, I must have looked like a mountain, immovable, unreachable, a force of nature that she had foolishly tried to conquer and failed. Our eyes met. I saw the plea in hers, the desperate desire for me to come to her, to wrap her in my arms, to tell her it was going to be okay to be the daddy who fixes everything. But I wasn't that man anymore. She had killed that man with 1,000 cuts of disrespect. I looked at her with a profound sadness, not for the woman she was, but for the child she used to be, the child who used to run to the door when I came home from work. That child was gone. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just nodded once, a slow acknowledgement of the reality we were both living in now. Then I turned my back on her. I pushed the heavy doors open and walked out of the ballroom. I walked past David, who fell into step beside me without a word. I walked through the lobby where the staff watched me with reverence. I walked out into the night, leaving my daughter alone in the ruins of her vanity. She had wanted to be independent. She had wanted to be free of my influence. Now she was. And as the cool air hit my face, I knew that the hardest part of the lesson was over. For me, at least. For Jasmine, the lesson was just beginning. The silence that descended on the ballroom was heavy and absolute. Just an hour ago, the space had been vibrating with the chatter of the city's elite, the clinking of crystal, and the hum of expectation. Now it was a cavern of echoes. The waiters moved like ghosts in the periphery, silently clearing away the untouched plates and the empty glasses. They avoided looking at the center of the room where the tragedy had finally come to a rest. I stood there, my hands deep in the pockets of my polyester suit, watching the last of the guests scurry out the side doors. They didn't look back. They were already on their phones texting the gossip to everyone who hadn't been lucky enough to witness the implosion firsthand. To them, this was just a story to tell over brunch tomorrow. To me, it was the funeral of a life I had spent 26 years trying to build for my daughter. Jasmine was the only one left. She sat on the floor amidst a sea of white flower petals that had been trampled by the fleeing crowd. Her dress, the $15,000 masterpiece she had screamed at me to pay for, was ruined. The hem was stained with spilled water and dirt. Her veil was torn, snagged on a chair as she had tried to run after Brad. She looked small. She looked like a child playing dress-up in a game that had gone horribly wrong. I took a step toward her. The sound of my shoe on the hardwood made her flinch. She looked up. Her face was a ruin of mascara and tears. When she saw it was me, a flicker of hope sparked in her eyes. It was a desperate, pathetic hope. The hope of a person who has burned every bridge but still expects to be able to walk across the water. "Dad," she croaked, her voice raw from screaming. I didn't answer. I just stood there looking down at her. I waited. She scrambled to her knees, crawling the few feet between us. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my cheap trousers, clutching the fabric as if it were a lifeline. "Dad, I was wrong," she sobbed, her head bowing until her forehead touched my shoes. "I was so wrong. Please, Dad, you have to help me. You have to save me." I looked down at the top of her head. I remembered braiding her hair when she was 5 years old. I remembered the smell of her shampoo. I remembered the promise I made to Ruth that I would always keep her safe. "Save you?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty room. "Save you from what, Jasmine? From the truth? From everything?" she wailed, looking up at me with pleading eyes. "Brad is gone. He is going to prison. His parents hate me. I have debt, Dad, massive debt. They are going to come after me. I have nowhere to go. I have no one." She squeezed my leg tighter. "I am a victim too," she whispered. "He tricked me. He used me. I didn't know he was a criminal. I just wanted to be happy. I just wanted you to be proud of me." "Proud of you," I repeated. "You thought marrying a fraud with a stolen last name would make me proud. You thought treating your father like a servant would make me proud. You thought stealing my house would make me proud." "No," she cried, shaking her head. "I was confused. He manipulated me, but I am your daughter. You cannot leave me here. You have millions, Dad. You have buildings. You could fix this with a signature. You could pay off the debt. You could get me a lawyer. You could take me home." I looked at her. I looked at the daughter who had threatened to keep my grandchildren from me. The daughter who had kicked my cat. The daughter who had called my life worthless. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Jasmine watched the movement, her eyes widening. She thought I was reaching for my checkbook. She thought I was reaching for the black card. She thought that after everything, the Bank of Dad was opening its doors one last time because that is what I had always done. I had always fixed it. I pulled out a plain white envelope. It was sealed. It wasn't thick. I held it out to her. "Get up, Jasmine," I said. She stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her dress. She took the envelope, her fingers trembling. She tore it open with frantic haste. She pulled out the contents. It wasn't a check. It wasn't cash. It was a single bus ticket. A one-way ticket to Philadelphia, leaving from the Port Authority terminal at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Behind the ticket was a folded piece of paper. It was a printout from a website. The address and contact information for a job placement center in downtown Philadelphia, and the address of a women's hostel that accepted emergency placements. She stared at the ticket. She turned it over as if looking for the money she was sure must be hidden there. She looked at the printout. Then she looked at me, her face twisting in confusion and fresh horror. "What is this?" she whispered. "A bus ticket. To Philadelphia." I took a step back, putting a definitive distance between us. "I am not giving you money, Jasmine," I said, my voice calm and final. "I am not giving you a lawyer. I am not giving you a penthouse. And I am certainly not giving you a bailout." "But Dad," she stammered, holding the ticket like it was a dead leaf. "I cannot go to Philadelphia. I do not know anyone there. I do not have a job. I do not have a place to live." "I know," I said. "That is the point." I pointed at the ticket in her hand. "You said my life was worthless," I said. "You said I was nothing. You said you were ashamed of my calloused hands and my cheap suits. You looked at the empire I built and you spat on the foundation because it smelled like sweat." I took a deep breath, letting the words settle. "So I am giving you a gift, Jasmine. I am giving you the greatest gift a father can give a child who has lost her way. I am giving you the opportunity to build your own life. From zero. Just like I did." "No," she gasped, dropping the envelope. "I cannot do that. I am not like you. I cannot work in a factory. I cannot live in a hostel. I am Jasmine Jefferson." "You are Jasmine Jefferson," I agreed. "And right now that name means nothing. You have no credit. You have no assets. and you have no father to hide behind. I gestured to the empty ballroom. You wanted the real world, Jasmine. You wanted to be a grown woman making her own decisions. Well, here it is. The real world doesn't care about your last name. It doesn't care about your dress. It cares about what you can do. And right now, you cannot do anything but spend other people's money. She fell to her knees again, trying to grab the envelope she had dropped, realizing it was the only lifeline she had left. But the house, she sobbed, looking up at me. The house in Brooklyn. My room. Can I just come home? Just for a while, until I get on my feet. I will be good, Dad. I promise. I will cook. I will clean. I will be the daughter you wanted. I shook my head slowly. The pain of what I had to say was sharp but necessary, like setting a broken bone. You cannot come home, Jasmine, I said, because there is no home to come back to. She froze. What do you mean? The house in Brooklyn, I said, my voice steady. The brownstone, the one you tried to steal, the one you called a rotting dump. I paused, making sure she heard every word. I sold it this morning. She stared at me, her mouth agape. You sold it? Yes, I said. I signed the closing papers at 9 a.m. The new owners take possession tomorrow at noon. The locks are being changed as we speak. My things are already in storage. But the money, she whispered, a flicker of her old greed sparking for a second. You got millions for it, right? Brad said it was worth millions. I did, I said. $3.5 million to be exact. It was a cash offer. Then give me some, she begged, reaching out her hand. Just a little, just enough to get an apartment, just enough to start over here. Please, Dad, you have so much. I looked at her hand, the hand that had never worked a day in its life. I do not have that money, Jasmine, I said. She blinked. What? I transferred the entire sum, I said. Every single penny of the sale proceeds. I transferred it an hour ago, to where, she asked, her voice shrill. To your offshore accounts. No, I said. To a trust. I walked closer to her, looming over her. I established a new charitable foundation today, Jasmine. It is called the Ruth Jefferson Foundation. It is dedicated to providing trade school scholarships for underprivileged youth. Kids who are willing to work. Kids who know the value of $1. Kids who would never dream of spitting on their father's sacrifice. Her face crumpled. You gave it away, she whispered. You gave my inheritance away to strangers. It wasn't your inheritance, I said, cold and hard. It was my money, and it was your mother's legacy. She wanted you to know the value of work. Well, now you are going to learn. I pointed to the bus ticket on the floor. That ticket is non-refundable, Jasmine. The bus leaves at 6. If you miss it, you are on your own on the streets of New York. And let me tell you, the streets are a lot colder than a hostel in Philadelphia. I buttoned my jacket. I adjusted my clip-on tie. You have a choice, I said. You can sit here and cry about the life you think you deserve. Or you can pick up that ticket, get on that bus, and start earning the life you actually have. I turned my back on her. Dad! Wait! She screamed. Dad, do not leave me. I am scared. I stopped. I didn't turn around. I was scared too, Jasmine. I said, my voice soft but carrying in the silence. When I came to this city with nothing but a tool belt and a pregnant wife, I was terrified. But I didn't beg, and I didn't steal. I worked. I walked toward the doors. Good luck, Jasmine, I said. I pushed through the doors and walked out into the lobby. Clara was standing there waiting for me. She held out a coat. It wasn't my old trench coat. It was a new cashmere overcoat. Your car is waiting, sir, she said. I put on the coat. It was warm. It fit perfectly. Thank you, Clara, I said. I walked out of the hotel and into the back of a black town car. I didn't look back at the ballroom. I didn't look back at the daughter I had left on the floor. I had broken her heart. I knew that. I had shattered her world. But as the car pulled away, merging into the city traffic, I knew I hadn't destroyed her. I had given her the only chance she had left. I had taken away the cushion that was suffocating her. Now she would have to breathe on her own, or she wouldn't. The choice was hers, and that was the most expensive gift I had ever given. The sun over the Florida Keys hit the water differently than it did on the gray pavements of Brooklyn. Here the light was gold and turquoise, shattering against the waves like 1,000 broken diamonds. I sat in the fighting chair at the stern of my 40-foot sport fisher. My hands relaxed around the rod, the salt spray cooling the skin that had been weathered by decades of New York winters. For the first time in 40 years, my knuckles weren't swollen from the cold or stiff from gripping a hammer. They were just resting. I reeled in the line slowly, the mechanical whir of the expensive gear, the only sound competing with the crying gulls. The boat was named the Ruth. I had bought it cash 3 months after the wedding. It wasn't a showpiece. It was a vessel built for deep waters, sturdy and reliable, just like the woman it was named after. It has been exactly 1 year since I walked out of the Grand Plaza Hotel, leaving my daughter on the floor of a ballroom I owned. 1 year since I stripped away the safety net and let gravity do its work. I looked at the horizon where the sea met the sky. It was a clean line, uncluttered, honest. That was my life now. I didn't hide my money anymore, but I didn't flash it either. I lived comfortably in a gated community in Boca Raton, wearing linen shirts and drinking good coffee. I had no one to impress. I had no one to lie to. I thought about Bradford Harrington. The last report I received from David Cohen said Brad was currently serving year 1 of a 5-year sentence in a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. The charges of wire fraud and aggravated identity theft had stuck like glue. His parents had lost their home in Connecticut and were living in a 2-bedroom rental in New Jersey, avoiding the phone calls of their former social circle. The dynasty had crumbled not with a bang, but with the quiet, pathetic whimper of a bounced check. Brad was where he belonged. In a cage of his own making. He had bet against the wrong man, and he had paid the ultimate price. I didn't feel joy thinking about him. I didn't feel anger. He was just a bad investment I had written off, a structural flaw I had corrected before the building collapsed. But Jasmine was a different story. I reached into the pocket of my linen shorts and pulled out a letter. The envelope was plain cheap paper, the kind you buy at a drugstore. The handwriting on the front was familiar but changed. It lacked the flourishes and the arrogance of her old signature. It was smaller, humbler. It had arrived 3 days ago, forwarded by David Cohen, who handled my mail. I had read it every morning since sitting here on the water, letting the words sink in. I unfolded the paper carefully. It was creased from being held. Dear Dad, I do not know if you will read this. I do not know if you even want to hear from me. I wouldn't blame you if you threw this in the trash without opening it, but I had to write. I am still in Philadelphia. I took the bus just like you said. I stayed in the hostel for 3 months. It was hard, Dad. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I was scared every night. I was cold. I was hungry. And for the first time in my life, I realized that nobody cared if I was a Jefferson or a Harrington or the Queen of England. If I couldn't pay for my bed, I was sleeping on the street. I got a job. It is not glamorous. I am waitressing at a diner downtown. My feet hurt, Dad. They hurt every single day. My back aches. My hands are chapped from washing tables. I stopped reading for a moment, looking out at the water. I remembered that ache. I remembered coming home with my boots feeling like lead weights, my spine screaming from laying asphalt. I remembered looking at my hands, rough and bleeding, and knowing that pain was the price of my family's survival. Jasmine was feeling it now. She was feeling the weight of labor. The letter continued. Yesterday, a customer yelled at me because his coffee was cold. He called me stupid. He called me worthless. And I almost snapped. I almost told him who I was, but then I realized I am nobody. I am just the girl pouring the coffee. And I took it. I apologized. I heated his cup. And he left me a $2 tip. Dad. I stared at those $2 for 10 minutes. It wasn't enough to buy a subway ticket, but I earned it. I swallowed my pride, and I earned it. I smiled. A small, genuine smile. $2. It was a fortune compared to the $50,000 she had blown in Vegas. Because those $2 had weight. They had value. I am living in a studio apartment now, she wrote. It is small. The faucet leaks. The heat is loud. It reminds me of our old house in Brooklyn. The house I hated. The house I wanted to sell. I miss that house, Dad. I miss the smell of your coffee in the morning. I miss the way the floorboards creaked. I miss Whiskers. I hope he is okay. I miss you. I am not writing this to ask for money. Please believe me. I do not want your money. I do not want a bailout. I am paying my own rent. I am paying off the debt Brad left me slowly. It will take me 10 years, but I will do it. I just wanted to say you were right. About everything. About Brad. About the money. About me. I was hollow, Dad. I was a shell painted gold. You broke the shell and it hurt. God, it hurt. But I think I am finally starting to become a real person. I am sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. Love, Jasmine. I folded the letter, slowly tracing the crease with my thumb. There was no return address on the envelope, but I knew where she was. I had a private investigator watching her from a distance, not to interfere, not to help, but just to ensure she was safe. I knew about the diner. I knew about the studio apartment. I knew she was working double shifts on weekends. She was climbing. She was starting at the bottom of the mountain where I had started 40 years ago, and she was climbing without a rope. I put the letter back in my pocket. My phone lay on the console of the boat. I could call David. I could tell him to send a check. I could tell him to pay off her debt, to buy her a condo, to give her an easy life again. I could end her struggle with a single phone call. The old Isaiah, the father who wanted to be a hero, would have done it. He would have rushed in to save his little girl from the big bad world. But I wasn't that man anymore. And she wasn't that little girl. If I helped her now, I would rob her of the victory. I would rob her of the pride of standing on her own 2 feet. I would turn her back into the entitled child who thought the world owed her a living. She was building character. She was building a soul. And you cannot buy a soul. You have to forge it in the fire. I picked up the phone, but I didn't call David. I didn't call Jasmine. I sent a text to the investigator. Is she safe? The reply came back a minute later. She is tired. She is working hard. But she is safe. She looks stronger, Isaiah. She walks different. I nodded to the empty air.
Good, I whispered.
Let her walk. I didn't reply to the letter. Not yet. She needed more time. She needed to know that she could survive the silence. She needed to know that an apology didn't fix everything overnight. She needed to learn that trust once broken takes years to rebuild. I wasn't punishing her. I was respecting her. I was respecting her enough to let her struggle. I was respecting her enough to let her become the woman her mother would have wanted her to be. I cast my line back into the water, watching the lure sink into the deep blue. I hadn't lost my daughter. I had found her. I had found her buried under layers of greed and entitlement, and I had dug her out. It had been a brutal excavation, but it was necessary. The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was a beautiful evening. I thought about the empty chair at my dinner table back in Boca Raton. Maybe in a year, maybe in 2, when she had paid off her first credit card, when she had promoted to manager, when she had learned that $1 earned is worth 1,000 inherited, maybe then I would send a letter back. Maybe I would invite her down here, not to live in luxury but to fish, to sit in silence and watch the water, to talk not about money or status but about life. Until then I would wait, I would watch from afar, and I would keep the light on. Because that is what fathers do. We build the foundation. We set the standards. And sometimes we have to tear the whole house down so our children can learn how to build it back up themselves. I felt a tug on the line, a strong, steady pull. I reeled it in my muscles, working the tension familiar and welcome. I had given her exactly what she asked for, a life without my money, a life without my influence. And in doing so, I had given her the only thing of value I had left to give. I had given her herself. And that, I thought, as I pulled a shimmering snapper from the ocean, was a legacy worth more than any building in Brooklyn. I cleaned the snapper right there on the deck, my knife moving with the precision of a man who has worked with his hands for 75 years. The scales flew off like silver coins glinting in the fading light. It was honest work. It was simple work. And the reward was immediate and tangible. I would cook this fish tonight. I would eat what I had caught. There were no middlemen, no loans, no pretenses, just effort and result. I wiped my hands on a rag and poured myself a glass of wine. It was a vintage Cabernet, dark and rich, swirling in the crystal glass. I sat back in the chair watching the sun bleed into the horizon, turning the ocean from turquoise to a deep, bruising purple. People often talk about revenge. They talk about it like it is a fire that burns you up inside. They say that seeking revenge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And maybe they are right when revenge is just about inflicting pain, when it is just about making someone bleed because you are bleeding. But what I did wasn't revenge. Not really. I took a sip of the wine, letting the tannins settle on my tongue. If I had wanted revenge, I would have let Brad marry her. I would have let him drag her down into his debt. I would have let the sharks come for her. I would have let her wake up in 10 years, bankrupt and broken, tethered to a man who despised her. That would have been revenge. That would have been cruelty. What I did was an intervention. It was a demolition. I looked at the empty seat across from me. It was the only thing on the boat that felt heavy, the absence of my child. But as I looked at it, I realized that the chair had been empty for a long time, long before the wedding. It had been occupied by a stranger, a ghost made of greed and entitlement. The real Jasmine, the daughter Ruth and I had raised, was only just now starting to find her way back to the table. She was in Philadelphia, washing dishes, serving coffee, learning that a smile costs nothing but can earn you a tip. She was learning that respect isn't something you inherit with a last name. It is something you build. I thought about the word she had used, worthless. She had called my life worthless. She had looked at my calloused hands, my gray suit, my silence, and she had seen zero value. She didn't understand that the foundation of a skyscraper is buried in the dirt. You do not see it. You do not take pictures of it. But without it, the tower falls. I had been her foundation. And because I was invisible, she thought I was unnecessary. Now she knew. She knew exactly what my worth was because she was feeling the weight of the world without me holding it up. I smiled a slow, satisfied smile that reached my eyes. The sweetest revenge wasn't destruction, it was education. It was the brutal, beautiful curriculum of reality. I had given her the hardest class of her life, but it was the only one that would save her. I raised my glass to the sunset, to Ruth, to the woman who told me not to let the money spoil our girl. "We did it, Ruth," I whispered to the wind. "It took a while, it got messy, but we did it. She is going to be okay. She is going to be strong, not because of my money, but because of her own sweat." I finished the wine and stood up. The air was getting cooler. It was time to go inside, time to cook my dinner, time to sleep the deep, restful sleep of a man who has settled his accounts. I wasn't just a retired construction worker anymore. I wasn't just a checkbook. I was a father who had loved his daughter enough to break her heart so she could use the pieces to build a soul. And that, I decided as I locked the cabin door, was a life worth living. Many believe that love means shielding your children from every storm, giving them the world on a silver platter. But I learned the hard way that true love sometimes requires letting them fall. My daughter measured a man's worth by the weight of his wallet, blind to the character forged in struggle. By stripping away her unearned privilege, I didn't destroy her life. I gave her the only gift that truly matters, the opportunity to build her own self-worth. Respect is not inherited, nor can it be bought. It is earned dollar by dollar, day by honest day. Many believe that love means shielding your children from every storm, giving them the world on a silver platter. But I learned the hard way that true love sometimes requires letting them fall. My daughter measured a man's worth by the weight of his wallet, blind to the character forged in struggle. By stripping away her unearned privilege, I didn't destroy her life. I gave her the only gift that truly matters, the opportunity to build her own self-worth. Respect is not inherited, nor can it be bought. It is earned dollar by dollar, day by honest day. Did you agree with Isaiah's decision to let his daughter hit rock bottom? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story of justice and resilience resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more life stories. See you in the next video.